follow them. I don't really care at the end of the day. Sorry to be callous, but that's just the way I feel. And I certainly don't experience much in the way of feelings at all. Not anymore. Not since I lost Tommy. Not since I saw the embodiment or non-embodiment of that cosmic horror known only as the glassy-eyed man. I'm a shell of myself, and I spend most days wondering why I still cling to life at all. It all started when I traveled back in time. I'll give you this one warning. Don't ever try to change the past. But you won't listen, will you? That's okay. I wouldn't listen either. I'd probably still do it all again, and probably still try if I had the sanity or means to do so. Should you come into possession of the means to time travel, which you very well may if you use the boomerang, then you will want to take precautions. The boomerang will fling you back in time, but then it will drag you back to the present day. You have a window of opportunity, and that is a wondrous thing. But there are dangers to fiddling with the very fabric of reality. It doesn't matter how big or small the things you want to change from your past. You must follow these rules. When you travel back to a given point in time, do all that you must within the first 24 hours because time becomes strange after that. Respect the window of opportunity, as even the slightest change can have dire consequences. You don't want to draw the attention of the glassy-eyed man. Should you draw his attention, do not engage. But I'm not your mother. Do what you will. It's your call should you tread the path that I treaded. Should you traverse the temporal waves embedded within existence, just know that disobeying the laws of the universe and defying those glassy eyes belonging to the man who skulks beyond the edge of everything is a mistake made only by those who are reckless and foolhardy and magnetized to peril. I should know because I am one such person. What I will do, however, is tell you my tale of horror, and you'll come to understand why some threads of reality are best left untangled. This is the story of the punishment that I faced and still face for my crimes against reality. In 2022, my son Tommy died in a car accident. Not the unavoidable kind, the kind brought about by his father, my ex-husband Henry, an abusive monster who, in spite of his mistreatment to my son and me, managed to keep a stranglehold on our family long after my separation from him. And it was not only a stranglehold in a metaphorical sense, but a literal one. Somehow Henry managed to woo the jury and get shared custody of Tommy, despite their knowledge that he had kept the two of us locked up in our home for roughly a year, well after the end of the lockdown. Of course, that wasn't how Henry spun the story. Things had been deteriorating since 2020, but I told myself that I would take my toddler and run as soon as the lockdown measures had been lifted by the local government. However, Henry had become quite accustomed to the pandemic, quite accustomed to keeping us in sight. The signs of emotional abuse had been there long before that, but the power of locking us up indoors had transformed him into something far worse. He sensed that I was thinking of leaving with our son, so he started to prepare. We lived in a rural part of Scotland, and though we weren't physically caged up in there, Henry found plenty of ways to keep Tommy and I from escaping. We'd make it halfway across those acres of farmland, surrounding his parents' old property before the deranged maniac would catch up to us. He would chuckle as he walked hurriedly alongside us. "At least 20 miles," he would say smugly, hands in his pockets, as my 5-year-old son and I would pick up our feet and scurry more quickly across the grass, bags in hands. "And that's how far you'll have to walk through fields, mountains, and forests before you reach the nearest town. You haven't got a phone, haven't got a car, haven't got food, haven't got water. How long will you last?" He was right. Henry fed us, Henry gave us water, Henry made sure that we didn't have the means to escape, but he never locked the doors, never physically restrained us. He simply controlled our means of survival. The kitchen was kept under lock and key. I wouldn't be allowed in there to cook unless under his supervision. The car keys were who knows where. My phone was locked up. There wasn't a sharp object or blunt instrument on hand that could overpower him, and I never found the set of keys for the various locked rooms in our house, which would have undoubtedly provided some means of getting in the car or the food pantry, so as to give Tommy and I a chance out on the road. 10 miles, that was the furthest that we ever got. Tommy was only tiny and his legs couldn't carry him far before the hunger and thirst became too much. Maybe we could have made it the rest of the way through the wilderness. I certainly could have. But the thought of my boy dying of thirst or starvation in land without clean water or any food beyond a handle of pruny berries was too terrifying. I always ended up turning back. Always ended up taking Tommy back to Henry, and the boy's father would welcome us with smug arms. He would feed the boy and give him something to drink, but I would often be starved for a day or two to help me think about what I had done. Anyhow, I would watch the news on TV and see the rest of the world returning to normal. But things stayed the same for my son and me, as our husband imposed a lockdown of his own upon us. A police officer finally knocked on the door in early 2022 to do a welfare check on Tommy, as it had been reported that teachers were concerned about him continuing to do online lessons. Moreover, my uncle, my only living relative, was alarmed by my relative radio silence over the past months, save for a handful of approved Christmas and birthday messages signed off by Henry, before my old phone would be returned to its lockbox. I had hardly been much of a social media user before my husband's strict measures, starting in late 2020, but my absence was noted by those who knew me before the pandemic began. Anyway, I revealed everything to the police officer and I thought that that would be the end of it. Thought that Henry would go to prison. Of course, being an investment banker, he had the money for the best lawyer around. He managed to put together a tall tale about being concerned for the welfare of my son and me, in light of the pandemic, so he was too scared to let us all back out into the real world. Shared custody. I don't know how he wrangled it, but he did. The jury believed that he had been anxious, frightened of the virus, only trying to protect his wife and son from the outside world. Of course, he was able to masterfully manipulate them. He had done so to me for years. That was how I fell in love with him in the first place. And this horror story is only the preamble to the true tale of terror, of course, but it's a necessary one. The real story starts a year later when my abusive former spouse brought my world to an end. In a drunken stupor while driving Tommy home at the end of a weekend stay, Henry careened off a country road and plowed his car directly into an oak tree. The paramedics declared my ex-husband and my son dead on impact. At least that's what my sister told me later. I was so distraught and mentally undone by the ordeal that I hardly registered anything told to me for many days and weeks. But that isn't the horror story that you're waiting to hear, is it? A tale of a terrifying and abusive husband. A tale of a nightmarish manslaughter. A tale of a grieving mother. No, you want to know what I mean when I say that there are rules when it comes to time travel. You want to know how Earth time travel could be possible at all. I don't doubt you for doubting me because that was exactly how I felt when Bradley Hall told me the same thing. What did you just say to me? I hissed at my neighbor. Bradley gulped. Listen, Mara, I wasn't trying to. Do you think that it's funny? I wheezed. Do you think that joking around about such a thing is going to put a smile on my face? I'm not joking, Bradley insisted, holding his hands up defensively. He looked frightened that I might lamp him with my balled-up fist, and he was right to be frightened of that. Mara, you've known me for 10 years. Tell me you know that I'd never be so cruel. and tell me that you know I'm serious. You see it in my eyes, I know you do." I did, but what he had just claimed was impossible. Absolutely impossible. "Bradley, my son is dead," I whispered. "He's not coming back. I don't know what the hell's wrong with you." "Nothing's wrong with me," Bradley promised. "Mara, there's a way to go back and fix things. I know because it happened to me last night. Lisa Monroe, you remember her, right? From the school runs with little Samantha and Tommy back in the day." I became quite pale at the mention of not only my dead son's name, but Bradley's comatose daughter. She had been in the hospital for quite some years, following some sort of bike accident on a nearby road. But then Bradley Hall told me something that simply did not add up with my worldview. "Lisa gave me something, Mara," my neighbor continued, plunging his hand into his trouser pocket. "Something that took me back in time and saved Samantha." I frowned. "She's better. I thought she was still in the hospital." "She is," Bradley said. I frowned more deeply. "Then I don't understand." "Mara, reality wasn't this way 24 hours ago," Bradley explained. "Not for me. My Samantha died during that bike accident 3 years ago. But then I went back and saved her. Well, as best as I could. The car still hit her. The universe works in strange ways like that. But she didn't die. She ended up in that comatose state." I nodded slowly, thinking that my dear old neighbor had lost his mind. Perhaps the grief of seeing his daughter in a vegetative, near brain-dead state had been compounded by the death of Tommy. Whatever the case, it seemed insensitive. To suggest that such science fiction nonsense could be true was absolutely deplorable as far as I was concerned. But out of respect for Samantha and Bradley, I held my tongue. It took all of my will, as I've been quite loose-tongued as of late. Grief is my excuse, but maybe I'm just unleashing my true self. "I have to make myself some dinner now, Bradley," I whispered, nodding towards the front door from my house and heading across the road. "I'm starting to eat properly just as you've been nagging me for." "I know you don't believe me," Bradley interrupted, finally producing a small, stone-like object from his pocket. "But take a look at this first, will you?" And then I found myself doing the inexplicable. Rather than yelling at the man for his insanity and his insensitivity at such a trying time for me, I actually gave him the time of day. It wasn't a courtesy this time, but a deep and compelling urge. I was entirely transfixed by the little metallic pebble in the man's palm, as if it were speaking to me, calling words at an unheard register, yet something in my brain or body or soul heard. Whatever I may or may not have believed about my old friend and his ridiculous tale, I was walking back towards the pavement, back towards my neighbor with his outstretched hand and the strange pebble sitting atop his palm. "What is it?" I asked. "It's already told you the answer to that question," Bradley replied gently. "I know that you hear it, Mara, even if you don't fully understand or believe that you do yet." "Hear what?" I asked. "Exactly what I heard when Lisa Monroe gave me the beautiful thing last night," he continued. "Hope." "Don't talk in riddles to me, Bradley," I sighed. "I'm so tired, broken, unwell. I don't have the time for—" "Samantha was dead, Mora," he interrupted again. "I know you don't believe that, but she was dead, in the old timeline, before I changed things. Maybe that timeline's gone now, maybe I've erased it, or maybe I've simply slipped into the alternate reality where my daughter is alive, in a coma perhaps, but alive. That's why I count my blessings every day. God, did people treat me strangely during those early days? You remember, acted like I wasn't grieving enough. Well, that was because I had already grieved my daughter's loss in another timeline, so having her back alive at all in any form was a gift to me. The boomerang is a gift." "Boomerang?" I asked, frowning at the pebble still sitting on that extended palm. "It doesn't look like a boomerang to me." "That's what Lisa called it," he said. "I know very little about how it works, what it is. I know as much as you know in a way. I know only that it was speaking to me, whispering its secrets in some twisted and unholy way. But we'll do the unholiest things for our children, won't we, Mora?" I shook my head. "I think I'm done with this conversation now, Bradley." And then my neighbor's eyes welled. "Please, Mora, you have to go back. You have to save Tommy because, well, I changed more than I meant to change." I frowned. "What on earth are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your son, Mora," Bradley whispered. "In the old timeline, he was alive and well. I don't know what I did, but I suppose the butterfly effect is true. I saved Samantha, but then I came back to a present day in a timeline with no Tommy." My eyes widened, and before I knew it, I was at the man's throat. All of a sudden, I believed him. Every last word of his tale. I felt it deep in my bones. He wasn't playing some cruel, practical joke. He was confessing the wrong that he had done. And willingly or unwillingly though this mistake may have been, the fact remained that he had killed my son. That was all I could think as I saw red. "Please," he choked as my hands wrapped around his throat. It was an act over which I barely had any control. An unconscious act, driven by a mother's primal rage. "Please, Mora, I didn't mean to." "Undo it," I hissed. "That's why," he croaked, shaking the pebble in his free hand as his face turned white. He didn't resist, however, for he seemed to agree that he deserved it. "That's why I'm offering this to you." I released the man's throat and let him speak. Bradley rubbed his neck. "You can go back and find a way to save Tommy, but maybe my little Samantha will be okay too. She can stay in that coma. You don't have to fix that, you know. You don't have to fix everything." "First, tell me what it is," I said, nodding at the pebble. "Properly, I mean, not just that it can take me back. Not just that it can fix things. How does it work? What is it really?" "I don't know," the man admitted wheezily, throat hoarse from the throttling to which I had subjected my neighbor. "I wasn't even given instructions by Lisa Monroe. She told me that I would know how to use it, know how to save Samantha. The boomerang would tell me, apparently. And she was right. Please tell me that you feel it too, Mora. Even looking at this thing, you understand its purpose. I know you do." I did. I've never been overcome by such dread in my life, but I understood the object in the man's hand. "First of all, I felt my heart slow," Bradley continued, placing the device in my palm and pulling his own hand away. The device was both cold and warm, and though I heard no words and hardly understood a thing that was happening, I knew it was all real, and that this boomerang really was the way to travel back in time and save my son. Then every other part of my body slowed down and the world outside of my body quickly followed. Soon enough, things weren't slowing anymore. They had stopped completely. Time froze. And then a few seconds later, time began to reverse, quicker and quicker with every passing second. Before I knew it, space and time were racing past my field of view in a blur. I time traveled 3 years backwards, thanks to the boomerang, and then time came to a halt. A few moments later, it pushed forwards at a normal speed, a natural speed. I saved Samantha, and then I was boomeranged forwards in time to the present day at a faster speed. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll go back and save Tommy." "I know," Bradley said. "I knew that before you did. But there are rules before you use this gift, Mora. Don't squeeze it just yet." "Rules?" I asked. Bradley nodded, holding out a hand, cautioning me. "I know you're itching to see your son again, to save him just as I had saved Samantha. But I urge you not to make the same mistake as me. I don't want to be responsible for somebody else getting hurt. Do you? I'll do anything for my boy just like you said, I whispered. My neighbor frowned. Well, that was the kind of thinking that I had. The kind of thinking that stole Tommy from this world and caused you to nearly kill me in the street. I would do the same thing, I said, starting to massage the pebble and dance my fingers across it. Bradley could sense that I was moments away from squeezing it and testing my own sanity, testing whether this time boomerang was real or just a figment of our shared hallucination. The rules, my neighbor hurriedly said. Pay attention, Mora. Firstly, you have 24 hours before time starts to become noticeably faster. When you use this device, you'll always be boomeranging back to the present day, so be quick with whatever you plan to do. Secondly, keep your goal narrow, as hungering for more will only land you in a heap of trouble. Lisa Monroe is a frail and lonely woman these days, isn't she? Her children don't speak to her. She wouldn't speak about it, but I know she pushed things too far with the boomerang. That's why she wanted to get rid of it. I can only imagine what her old timeline was like before she meddled with the past. Can only imagine what horror she endured if she no longer wants to use it at all. But that won't stop you, not with your son on the line. Thirdly and lastly, do not ever engage with the glassy-eyed man. I raised a brow. I beg your pardon. You'll know him, when you see it, Bradley explained. He is the final arbiter of all matters in this and every universe. He lies beyond the cracks of reality. He judges those who meddle too greatly with the rightful order and occurrence of things. I don't know how I know those things. Maybe the boomerang spoke the truth to me. Maybe the glassy-eyed man spoke the truth to me. Either way, I escaped that shadowy figure by a hair's breadth. And I'll tell you this, you'll never be the same after seeing him. And I'm sure all would be far worse if he were to ever get a hold of you. I was entirely baffled by this man's new addition to a story already too ludicrous to be believed. This time I didn't take a single word of Bradley's explanation seriously. The boomerang told me nothing of a man with glassy eyes, a shadowy entity from another plane of existence. It told me only of the utopia that awaited me once I was reunited with my son. I realized now that the boomerang was goading me. It wanted me to travel back in time for some nefarious reason. The idea of it being sentient at all is one that still haunts me, and if you're hoping for answers from the rest of my story, you'll be sorely disappointed. I only have a tale of terror to tell. An account of the awfulness that befell me when I finally squeezed the boomerang. And it was as Bradley Hall had promised it would be. There came a physical and psychological nightmare like no other from my life up until that point. I felt the very makeup of my body begin to grind to a halt, as if I had waded into some dense sludge, as if quicksand itself were gobbling up my paralyzed body and sliding me into its gullet. And there was no denying the truth of the story and the purpose of the device, as the environment surrounding me started to grind to a halt too. Before I knew it, the world had paused, time had paused, and then came the part that left me truly nauseated and disoriented. The clock started winding backwards, and I watched as the timeline reversed, watched as my own life reversed and the boomerang flung me back in time, flung me back a month, as if it had sensed the exact moment in space and time that I was hoping to reach. The day on which Tommy went to his father's house for the weekend. It was Friday afternoon, 48 hours before Henry would get behind the wheel with 3 bottles of whiskey sloshing around in his gut and drive my son Tommy into a tree. There would be no such turn of events this time. I promised that to myself and Tommy. Wherever he might be on that day from the past, I would burn the whole world down for that boy. And Bradley Hall berated himself for unwittingly sentencing my child to death by altering time to save his daughter. But the truth was that I would have wittingly and quite gladly done the very same thing, if not worse. I would kill for that boy, and I was willing to do so. I wasn't sure whether such a notion was driven by my grief about Tommy, my anger at Bradley, or some manner of supernatural possession from the boomerang in my clenched fist. Whatever the case, I had done it. I had returned to a point in time at which my son was still alive, and I knew that because of what I could see before me. I was standing on the pavement opposite my driveway where I had been talking with Bradley Hall only moments earlier, or a month in the future, I had to remind myself. And dead ahead, sitting on the living room sofa and playing video games, was my 11-year-old son, Tommy. "Tommy!" I cried out as I ran across the road on that warm spring day and tore across the driveway. My feet barely touched the tarmac or the paving slabs as I gunned for the front door. It flung open in my hand, startling my son from the room adjacent to the hallway. He spun around on his seat, and then came the screen informing him that some Fortnite player had just shot him, bringing his battle royale to a close. "Mom!" Tommy huffed and groaned when he had turned back to the screen to see that he had lost. Had not, in fact, claimed a winner-winner chicken dinner. "You scared the poop out of me and made me lose the game." "Language, Tommy," I cautioned with tears in my eyes and joyous laughter in my lips as I rushed towards my son, who from my perspective had been resurrected. "I said poop." Tommy chuckled as I lunged over the back of the sofa and wrapped my arms around him. Mom, what are you doing? Get off me, weirdo." "I love you, Tommy," I moaned. "Okay," my son muttered uncomfortably, finally shrugging me off him. "Is that because I'm going to Dad's house this weekend?" I gulped. There it was, the reason for being there. The thing I needed to fix should I have a hope of saving Tommy's life. "I'd better go unpack my things, actually," Tommy continued, checking the time on his phone. "Dad'll be here in about a half hour or so." "No," I croaked. "Don't go." My son frowned. "But you said the judge is making—" "I don't care," I murmured. "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Right now, I just want you and I to, I don't know, enjoy the weekend. Do something fun." "Mom, I'll only be with him for 2 days," Tommy whispered, eyes looking a little wide and timid, as they often did before he spent the weekend with his father. "Dad doesn't do bad things anymore. He's not good, but he's safe, I promise. 2 days and I'll be home." I hated that. Hated how mature my 11-year-old son sounded. It wasn't right. Henry had forced the child to grow up so quickly during the pandemic. The boy's father had been driven into such a deranged mindset that Tommy quickly learned, as I did, that a sturdy disposition was absolutely essential to survive in that house, to survive Henry. It sickened and still sickens me that the jury did not see what I saw in my ex-husband. They were swept off their feet by that charming demon in much the same way as I had been. So before Henry had a chance to woo any other gullible persons who might hand over my baby to him, I walked around to the front of the sofa, took Tommy's hand, and guided him up to his feet. "Pack your things, Tommy," I said. My son frowned. "Mom, it's okay." "It's not okay," I said in a fractured, croaky tone, eyeing my son with a wild gaze that seemed to get through to him, seemed to communicate that something very bad was about to happen, should we linger for too long. We had to get out of that house before my ex-husband's car pulled onto the driveway, for Tommy would die if he were to go on that weekend visit to his father's house. "Okay," my son hoarsely replied, brilliant mind seeming to read through the lines, and then he scurried out of the living room and up the stairs. I followed him upstairs with labored breath, winded from anxiety more than physical exertion, and I dashed into my room. Clothes and toiletries flew into a suitcase, and the two of us were back on the landing within 60 seconds. "Mom, are we going to be all right?" Tommy asked meekly, clutching his own little rucksack with whitening knuckles. I gulped and nodded, tears in my eyes. "We are now, Tommy." The two of us rushed down the stairs, across the hallway, and through the front door. My arms ached from carrying my bulky suitcase in both arms, but I felt powered onwards by the glad sight of an empty residential street ahead. Henry's Ford Focus was not trundling down the road towards our driveway. We had time to get away. "It's just for the weekend," I promised, but I knew that it was a lie. Even if I were to successfully change the past and save my son's life, what then? A few weeks or months from then, it would just happen again. Henry would get behind the wheel with too much liquor in his system. He wasn't ever going to change. If anything, he was only going to get worse. That's how abusers evolve. And by the time a jury would be wise enough to see through his deception and charm, it would be too late. Tommy would die in some other horrific car accident, or perhaps another horrendous form of abuse. Maybe in Henry's own home. Nowhere was safe from that monster. Henry had never laid a finger on his son, but he had come close to doing so to me. One night, in a drunken rage, he raised a hand which quivered in the air. He had been considering it, sending the back of his hand across my cheek. He had resisted the urge that day, and Tommy and I made it out a few weeks later. But it was only a matter of time before Henry discovered that part of himself. The part that transcended acts of emotional abuse easily redressed and justified to the gullible jurors of the Crown Court. The point was that I realized we couldn't just run away for that weekend. I didn't care about the court-mandated shared custody of our child. I had to save Tommy's life for more than just a handful of days. I had to save him from his father for the remainder of his days. But the boy didn't need to know that. As much as he feared his father, the child would have likely been conflicted about being torn away like that. I was just grateful that he was climbing into the car with me and agreeing to skip the weekend with his dad. "Where are we going, Mom?" Tommy asked. I shivered as I started the engine. "I don't know, kid. On a road trip, I suppose." We followed town roads, country lanes, and motorways across the country, traveled for hours and hours into the night. As we drove, I ignored the notifications on my phone, which clung to the inner windscreen above the dashboard. The messages and missed calls from Henry overlaying the Google Maps app, which was displaying no destination at all. It was only open out of habit. Eventually, I searched for nearby Holiday Inns and I selected the closest one. "Shouldn't we answer?" Tommy asked as we pulled into the car park and Henry called for the 13th or 14th time. I shook my head. "No, Tommy, we shouldn't. Your dad isn't safe to be around right now." My son nodded and sniffled. Tommy had been a single-digit age when we last lived with his father, but he remembered how Henry had been when he was angry. In fact, it was harder to remember how the man had been when he wasn't angry, as that was a distant memory from long before the pandemic. Long before lockdown and isolation from the world drove the man to lunacy. Or at least brought out the lunacy that had always been burgeoning just a tad beneath the surface. I sleepwalked through booking the room, taking the key card from the receptionist, and leading my boy up to the second floor with our things. I had sleepwalked through the entire road trip to that town, whose name I could barely remember. I checked Google Maps on my phone, as ridiculous as that sounds, to see where we were. Some town called Heavens. Do you know, I don't remember. It wasn't important. Nothing was important to me but my son. And I'm sure you're all listening with wide ears as I talk about the impossibility of having traveled back in time, thanks to a tiny silver pebble which was sitting in my pocket. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. Cosmic impossibilities of science fiction or supernatural proportions. They pale in comparison to the primitive elation of being reunited with one's own child. It was an indescribable feeling. Once we were locked safely in that hotel room and I felt that I could breathe again, I let the tears flow. My boy Tommy was alive, and I was going to make sure that he didn't end up in that car with his father on Sunday evening, that he didn't end up crushed in a heap of metal and tree bark. "Mom, why are you crying?" Tommy asked, having dumped his rucksack on his bed and come rushing over to me to offer a hug. I tightly embraced my boy and answered through sobs, "Oh, I was just scared, Tommy, but we're safe now. You're safe now." "Thank you, Bradley Hall," I whispered after my son and I untangled from our embrace, and I looked down at my pocket, at the pebble shape protruding through the fabric. "I forgive you now, Bradley. You did what a father must do for his girl, and I did what a mother must do for her boy. You saved your Samantha, and I saved my Tommy. We both got what we wanted, and we didn't break any rules. We toed the line, sure, I won't lie about that. We changed things. Mankind wasn't built to travel through time, but we're okay now. We're okay because we didn't get greedy. Now the universe can leave us alone, and we can leave it alone. I'll throw this pebble away, throw it into the depths of some ocean." And the harrowing thing is that I actually believed it. It helped me drift off to sleep, the best sleep that I had had in weeks, because it was the first night in which I could close my eyes and know that my little Tommy was still alive. Alive and well, snoring softly in the single bed adjacent to mine. And that sound, as frustrating as it might have been before all of this nightmare began, was the most soothing white noise that I think I had ever heard in my life. It sang me to sleep. A wheezy lullaby that took me to the land of Nod, took me into a dream of black, endless black, and there appeared to be something drowning in that black sea, but it wasn't drowning at all. Only helpless things drown. No, this thing was swimming, and it was two things actually. Two round, white things like little pebbles floating to shore, floating towards me. The woman who stood in the darkness and looked down at the lapping, frothing tide of darkness, bringing those two white, not pebbles, I realized in horror. The two things were sticking too firmly together, as if bound to the same thing. And they were bound to the same thing. They weren't pebbles at all, in fact, but eyes. Glassy eyes. Glassy eyes of some black thing that barely had a form in that black place. But I realized that may well be its form. A formless thing trying its best to present itself in a tangible physical way to a mortal being living in a tangible and physical realm. I don't think this thing had a shape or even had eyes, but I knew its name. The glassy-eyed man. And then I awoke in a sweat. I was sitting upright and glancing around the black room. Tommy was sleeping soundly in the bed next to mine, and I reached for the bedside table to see the time. 3:34. Of course it would be such an unholy time like that. It was always some unholy time such as that when I woke from my bad dreams. Only the bad dreams were usually about Henry, about the atrocities he committed all in the name of protecting Tommy and me. That old lie. But I've always been one to dream about reality, even when I was a little girl. My dreams about Henry were grounded in things happening to me in the real world, and in much the same way as horrible as it seemed, I realized my dream about this glassy-eyed man was grounded in the real world too. I wanted to dismiss it, wanted to call it some ghost story that Bradley Hall had told me to perhaps keep me in check, abiding by the time travel rules of the pebble. But then I heard myself speaking inwardly. Time travel, I thought. If such a cosmic impossibility is possible, then what else might be possible? Maybe non-physical beings from beyond the fabric of our universe. Beings with glassy eyes that watch over those sinners who dare to fiddle and meddle with the timeline. I felt it. Outside the window to our hotel room, there was something watching us. I didn't question how I knew that. I just clambered to my feet and walked over to the window as quietly as possible, tiptoeing so as to not stir Tommy from his deep slumber. Not out of respect for his REM cycle, but because he had always been a curious and stubborn boy, which he inherited from his mother. If he had woken to see me walking over to the window, he would have wanted to know why. He would have wanted to look. And I knew even before I looked that Tommy should not see what I was about to see. I parted the drapes in the middle ever so slightly, just enough to poke one half of my face through the opening and look out at the car park below with one eye. The world outside was black, save for a few lampposts illuminating the small Holiday Inn parking area, consisting of about 40 spaces in 4 rows. And standing on the road at the middle of it all was something revealed boldly and brashly by the artificial light, yet not boldly at all. For this was not a thing that could be revealed. I had already learned as much from my terrible nightmare. It was the glassy-eyed man. He was standing, a silhouetted figure with 2 blazing white pinpricks on what may have been his face, and he was looking up at our second-floor hotel room window, looking at me if he could look at all, if he had eyes at all. As I say, it was the strangest thing, and that's the most pleasant way in which to put it. The truth is that I've only ever been more terrified when recalling that moment, because the greatest horror is that the man is near impossible to remember. It's as if my brain has scrubbed whatever it knew of the glassy-eyed man's appearance from my brain. There had to be more to him than a silhouette and white eyes. There had to be. Maybe if so, his appearance had to be scrubbed from my memory bank to save my very sanity, to save my very soul. I put a hand to my mouth and stumbled back from the curtains, letting them pull shut. And as I backed towards my bed on knocking knees, trying desperately to tread carefully so as to not wake Tommy, I felt a strange sickness come over me. It was a peculiar thing to feel so scared by a figure standing still at night. After all, I could have convinced myself that the lamppost might not have been that bright, or might not have been clearly revealing those slightly darker patches of the car park, meaning a perfectly ordinary man had been reduced to a quite formidable and frightening-looking stranger in the dark. If that line of thinking hadn't worked, I could have even convinced myself that I hadn't woken from my nightmare, that it was all still a dream. But no line of reasoning would have worked because I felt it in my gut. Felt those glassy eyes looking into my soul long before I even opened the curtains. Just as I felt that glassy-eyed man was the most dangerous and unstoppable force that I had ever beheld. Far more frighteningly powerful than the boomerang knocking about in my pocket of my trousers, which were lying across the armchair to one side of the room. This was a being so terrifying that even while standing still he seemed to pursue. And that was because he wasn't really standing still at all. He was in all places at all times. I truly believe that, and I still do. Even now, long after everything has come to pass, I still feel him watching me, still feel those glassy pinpricks observing from the dark. If he were so willing, the glassy-eyed man could well have appeared at the foot of my bed in that hotel room. But that didn't stop me from tucking myself back under my duvet and holding it up to my chin. As if that would do a thing to save me. To save my boy. I looked across to Tommy and said a prayer in my head. Prayed to that deity or universal arbiter. I'm sorry, I thought. Whatever I've done to interfere with your plan, I'm sorry. But don't punish him, please don't punish him. He's only a boy. He's my boy and I would do anything for him. I would face any punishment. Take me instead. I know that's an obvious thing to offer, but take me, please, I beg you. I prayed that the glassy-eyed man would show mercy for altering the events of the past. After all, he had gifted Bradley Hall with Samantha's life. Yes, she remained in a comatose state at our local hospital, but she was alive. He was alive. It was me who had been punished for Bradley's insolence. And that was when I was overcome by rage. Why was the glassy-eyed man watching me? Why was he threatening and cautioning me with those eyes? Tommy was never supposed to die. I growled inwardly as I lay awake in that bed, while the minutes ticked by and dawn approached. He died only because Bradley changed the past. I'm just fixing his mess. I'm just putting things back to how they were supposed to be. He did wrong, not me. Punish him. I felt a little disgusted with myself for thinking such a thing, but then I realized it wouldn't matter anyway, none of it. The glassy-eyed man was the thing that would prove the ultimate decider. I doubted he had a moral compass. He simply swore allegiance to the universe, to the preservation of reality and its fundamentals. He wasn't trying to punish me, he didn't care about who was to blame for this untethering of the timeline. So yes, Bradley Hall had unraveled the rightful course of events and killed my son by saving his daughter. But I was only unraveling the timeline further by traveling back and making my own amendments. For all I knew, I was killing somebody else's, or maybe simply killing a little butterfly somewhere else in the world. That's how people talk about the effect, isn't it? Every little thing matters, I'm sure. That was how the cosmic entity saw it. It wasn't how I saw it, but I knew it was how everything seemed from the eyes of that unfeeling thing. That unfeeling and unthinkably powerful thing. And perhaps it was right, for it was a far higher being than me. I mean, what do I know? I'm just an ape. But this ape wanted only to save its child. Forget about the universe. Mom! I woke up to Tommy shaking me by the shoulders, sunlight pouring through the window. It was noon according to my phone. The two of us had slept in, which surprised me at first, to be exact. I was surprised that I had fallen asleep at all. I had been kept so rigidly upright in my bed, duvet to my chin, by the fear of that entity emerging from the black in our room. Its white eyes would lap against my shore, brought by that dark wave that I had seen in my dream. But at some point it seemed I had finally drifted off to sleep. Perhaps around dawn, and in that sense it made perfect sense that I was waking up at noon. It made less for Tommy, as the lazy boy must have slept for half a day at that point, but regardless, I was on alert. I hadn't wanted to hang around in one place for that long. My head felt heavy. Time felt heavy. Everything felt different from the day before. When you travel back to a given point in time, do all that you must within the first 24 hours because time becomes strange after that. The first rule rang in my head, and that's when it all made sense. I was boomeranging. Time had rapidly raced a month backwards to get me to that point in space and time, and now time was starting to pull forwards at a quickening pace. But it was okay. I had done what I needed to do. I had saved Tommy and I was done. But are you done? I wondered. You're still on the run. This wasn't part of the plan. You were meant to get him away from his father for the weekend and then be done with it. Let the natural course of events unfold. You're still fiddling, meddling, changing things. But changing what? Came the contrarian voice in my head. This is a new timeline now. I'm just doing what I always should have done. Getting Tommy well away from his dad. Screw the court, screw the law. Screw everything but Tommy. I'm just doing what I'm doing this because he died, I realized. I'm changing things based on my knowledge of a past that I've overwritten. Crap, and I'm still changing things. That's why the glassy-eyed man is watching. I'm fiddling too greatly with the timeline. I'm doing too much. I need to go home, let Tommy go to school, lead a normal life. Even if that includes Henry. Even if that puts my boy at risk. The phone rang. It was a rapid ring, a rapid thrum like that of my heartbeat. Everything was becoming so fast. That entire day became a blur, in fact. I was faintly cognizant of Tommy saying things at 1,000,000 miles per hour. Faintly cognizant of the 137 missed calls and 27 unread texts from Henry. I had been deleting the messages one by one without bothering to read them. Well, it was less that I wasn't bothering and more that I didn't want them to bother me. But in the blur of speeding up time, I read one notification that stood out over the others and pained my heart sharply. If you won't do it the court's way, we'll have to do it my way again. I remember it, the rapid rush of time, the blur of shapes and sounds. Maybe I was holding a conversation with my boys, time sped up. Or maybe I became a zombie-like husk, hurrying us into my car and heading back on the road to take us far away from Henry. I know that I sodded it all. Sodded the sensible part of my brain telling me to get Tommy home and start leading a normal life again. But I threw caution to the wind, threw the rules to the wind. And I remember one other thing. I remember driving down a dark country lane that night, the environment rushing past in a blur, and then swerving around a figure in the road. A figure with eyes like headbeams blinding me from the other side of the road. Maybe it was just another car coming the other way. I'm sure that's how Tommy saw it. I'm sure he was simply grateful that I saved our lives. But I know what it really was and who it really was. The glassy-eyed man. He was watching and he was getting closer because I was trying too hard to fight the will of the universe. I needed to let things be as Bradley had with Samantha. The universe had granted him his daughter's life, though she had ended up in a comatose state. Maybe the same would be true for Tommy, but I felt sick at such a thought. Sick at the idea of leaving his fate up to some higher power. Sick at the idea of relinquishing control to something greater than me. I knew the glassy-eyed man was trying to reach and punish me for meddling with the timeline, just as Bradley warned, but I didn't care. My head throbbed as we swerved past him, but I didn't care about that either. Tommy's voice jabbered at a speed far too quick to untangle, words far too high-pitched and sped up to discern. All I thought was that I needed to get us far, far away from that thing in the road. The road and the world and Tommy's questions about where we were heading next on our flee across the country. All those many facets of reality started to blur together and become deafening noise and blinding color. And then reality's mad dash forward in time became too quick to follow it all. When I re-entered the present day, I felt light, felt that the boomerang had let go of me, had released me from its time-traveling clutch. I was normal again, the world was normal again. These were the lies that I told myself as I smiled, teary-eyed, at the young boys sitting on the bed opposite from mine. There we were in another hiding place, another hotel room, another day of a long month on the run. But we were safe and we were alive. He was safe, he was alive, and that was all I truly cared about. But the new timeline was worse than I could have imagined. You see, as much as I told myself and my son that we were running from Henry, only I knew the truth, that we were running from something far greater and far more terrifying. Something with a purpose that would not be denied. Not by a mother, no matter how strong her will. And worst of all, we were running from something that could not be outrun. And these were the facts that came rushing back into my brain as it caught up to the past month of the new timeline. The 4 weeks through which I had rushed at an unbelievable speed, and assumedly acted normally, made the decisions that Mara would usually make, thought the things that Mara would usually think. It was a time travel hangover in a sense. I was just picking through the fog and haze of the night before to remember what had happened. Only it wasn't a single night that I was trying to remember. It was an entire month. And it wasn't a hangover that pounded through my every waking thought. It was a nightmare during which I had defied the very laws of the universe. Firstly, I remembered that we were on the run, as we had been for those past 4 weeks. We hadn't returned home because Henry would find us. We had been living out of hotels and even my compact, insufficient Fiat 500 on a few occasions. Family and friends had been trying to contact me every single day. I had missed calls and messages from more than just Henry, as people were worried about where I had gone. Some were worried that Henry had done something to me. Nearly all of them knew that he was to blame in some way. They just didn't know how. They knew that was why I'd run, and that was enough. But as that last, hazy month returned to my memories, I recalled there was more than that. I had to take out cash and start paying for small, family-run bed and breakfasts that way, as the police were looking out for my name at hotels. I had been reported missing and as having essentially kidnapped my son. Henry had the law on his side, which was a dangerous thing with a monster like him. Loved ones offered to hold us up. Uncle Brian used to be a lawyer, and he left a message saying that he would be able to help me out of this mess. He just wanted to see Tommy and me safe. I know that he was telling the truth. I know he likely would have been able to help me in court, but he wasn't able to stop Henry from getting custody of Tommy in the first place. And even if my abusive ex-husband could be placated, all would not be well. I was constantly on the move because I was afraid that, should I stand still for too long in any one place, I would come face to face with the glassy-eyed man, that monster seeking to punish me for altering time itself. My memory of the new timeline was fuzzy, and it felt as if somebody else had been living it. I know that it was me racing through time thanks to the boomerang and living those days, making those decisions, thinking those thoughts. It all just feels like somewhat of a dream. It's impossible to explain, and I really wouldn't want any of you to understand. I'm just hoping my story is sufficient to deter you from ever getting your hands on a boomerang and trying to change your past too. You see, it may seem as if I had it all. I saved Tommy, kept him alive in the present. But that day I made it back and started to experience time again is the day that the nightmare came to its hellish conclusion. One night in yet another hotel room, my son and I both woke to the sound of shouting and yelling and hollering coming from outside the window. This time, we were on the ground floor of what was a rather titchy bed and breakfast with a rather titchy car park outside. I didn't feel as safe, didn't feel as sheltered from the outside. And with Tommy sitting upright in his own bed, shivering in the dark, I felt even more vulnerable. "Go back to bed, Tommy," I pleaded as a man yelled outside. "Please just..." "That's him, isn't it?" Tommy whimpered, eyes teary. "Mom, I told you that we should just go to the police. I told you that running from him was only going to make it worse. And now he's going to hurt us. Or worse, take me away from you." "There's worse than even that, Tommy," I thought, heart thumping as I climbed out of bed. "Something worse than Henry. Something that won't just take you away from me, but take you away from the world itself." I didn't say any of that aloud. Didn't have the strength to say any of it aloud. I walked over to the window and drew the curtains again. This time, as I had feared and Tommy had already distinguished from the familiar voice, it wasn't the glassy-eyed man. It was indeed Henry, and he was screaming, "Mora, Tommy!" And then his voice lessened a little and he cleared his throat. "I love you both, okay? I'm not angry. I don't care what you've seen online or in the news, I'm not angry. I don't blame you for going crazy. I just want you to get the help you need. Now come out here and come home with me. You and Tommy, come on. We need to go." I whispered to my son, and I smiled a little as I saw him already starting to pack his bag. "He's going to send you to prison," Tommy blubbered. I shook my head, packing my own bag in the dark. I didn't want to turn on a light, as Henry would have immediately known which room we were staying in. "He likely wants to get the court to send me to a psychiatric hospital, Tommy. That's where he always wanted to send me back when we all lived together. Remember? He wanted everybody to think that I was the crazy one." "A hospital," my son repeated breathlessly, slipping his rucksack onto his back. "That doesn't sound any better." I wheeled my suitcase away from the bed, grabbed my son's hand, and nodded at the hotel room door. "Come on, baby, let's go." I ushered Tommy out of the room and down the corridor towards the fire exit that the owner had pointed out on the ground floor when we had first arrived. But then came the thump of the front doors to the tiny bed and breakfast swinging open. and I turned to look down the long corridor at the reception area of the 2-floor family business on a quiet residential street. There, standing in the reception with balled fists, was my furious ex-husband. "Mora!" Henry screamed at the top of his lungs from the other end of the corridor, and then he began to scream incoherently, descending into one of his rages, one of his black spells. Only this was blacker than any I had seen before. Gripped by terror, I suddenly realized I wasn't going to be sent to the psychiatric hospital. I was going to be sent to the grave if my unhinged ex-husband caught up to us. "Run!" I yelled at Tommy, dropping my suitcase to the carpet. The two of us darted to the fire exit and pushed it open together, and then we made it down the side of the building, beelining for my car parked next to the main road of that sleepy village. But Henry was too quick, too horribly, impossibly quick. He reached up to the two of us before I managed to get the car door open and slammed into me. I screamed out in pain, hand and wrist crumpling against the metal bodywork of my car. There came cracking bones with the screams, and multiple bones fractured in my hand, wrist, and arm. But I didn't notice any of that at the time. I was too busy turning to face my attacker and ensuring that he was far from my boy. My beautiful, brilliant boy who didn't want to be far from his monstrous father, didn't want to leave me to fend for myself. "Leave her alone!" screamed my 10-year-old son as he charged at Henry. The boy wailed at his father's side, lamping him with limp, boyish fists that weren't tough enough to even leave a dent in the 6-foot-tall brute. And all that happened next happened in a flash too quick for me to stop. I managed only to cry out, "Wait!" as Henry turned away from me and towards his boy. The man had a fogginess in his eyes that made me wonder for a haunting moment if it were really him at all. I think about it all the time, in fact. Think about how his eyes had glazed over. The memory changes every time that I reflect upon it, but there have been times when I've been absolutely certain, and I was certain at the time too, certain that the white pinpricks of the glassy-eyed man were sitting in the skull of my abusive ex-husband. "No," I whispered. A BMW was hurtling down the village's main road at a too rapid pace. It was 11 o'clock on a Monday evening. The streets were otherwise devoid of life in that nothing ever happens here village. But of course there was a car on that road at that moment. As Henry, puppeteered by a horrifying entity from beyond the bounds of the universe itself, yelled primally and pushed our son out into the main road. The BMW's brakes squealed, but it was fruitless. The boy went under the wheels and the vehicle lurched upwards as it rolled over him. I remember very little from the black fog which followed. A grief thicker and heavier than the one that I endured the first time Tommy had died. Not just because I witnessed it with my own eyes, but because it happened in such a horrific way, and because I had been powerless to stop it. I remember vaguely attempting to squeeze the boomerang while screeching in torment, but the device didn't take me back in time. Not even when I squeezed hard enough to leave black and blue bruising on my palm. My first memory after it all was this psychiatric hospital, which is now my home. It was many weeks later by this point, and I had been practically catatonic during that time. Of course, I had found my way here. The irony of ending up where Henry had wanted me to go isn't lost on me. He, of course, is rotting in prison for murdering our son. Whether he did so of his own volition or under the influence of that creature with glassy eyes, I do not know, and I do not want to know. The boomerang is gone, Henry's gone, Tommy's gone, and I feel as I've lost more than I did the first time because I'm not just a shell this time. I'm a shell possessed and haunted by that glassy-eyed man from beyond the bounds of the universe. He keeps watch over me, even after I let the boomerang drop to the floor of the hospital many days ago now. It was taken away by some business person visiting their relative. It's gone now. Why won't the creature leave me alone? And why won't somebody just let me die? And this is hell. I'm living in hell. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. As you know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I think it's a good reminder that a lot of us are carrying things around that we never really talk about. Life gets overwhelming sometimes. Stress, anxiety, and uncertainty about the future. It could sit in the back of your mind and keep you up at night. And I think a lot of people convince themselves that they just have to deal with it alone. But the truth is, nobody has all the answers. Sometimes it really helps just having somebody there to listen, understand, and help you work through what's on your mind without judgment. A therapy can be a place to do that. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served worldwide, BetterHelp makes it easy to get matched with a therapist that fits your needs. They'll do the initial matching for you based on a short questionnaire, and if your first match isn't the right fit, you can switch therapists at any time. You don't have to be on this journey alone. Find support and to have somebody with you in therapy. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/MrCreeps. That's better, HELP.com/MrCreeps. Have any of you ever wanted to go back in time? That was the question Mr. Milton asked the other attendees at the bi-weekly bereavement support group. I never did learn his first name, which, given how intertwined our two lives became, may seem rather odd. And given the horror that followed, of course, it makes perfect sense. Besides, grief is a disarming thing, a thing impossible to describe. I could lie like other sufferers and offer a simplified explanation of the experience, could reduce it to a mere dulling or heightening of emotions. However, it's far more complex than that. Grief is a vulnerability which exposes that buried side of oneself, the ugly, that second ego buried in some distant nook of the mind. You might not even believe that yours exists, but it does. And the right kind of trauma can unlock it. And that's what happened to me. It's what happened to Mr. Milton. In answer to his question, the facilitator of the group let a deep sigh free. Sure, I think we've all wanted to turn back the clock and see our loved ones again. Mr. Milton nodded, but said nothing. He continued looking down at his twiddling thumbs. The man was in his late 40s, sporting graying hair, a slight gut, and rimmed glasses. He was what some members of the group teasingly called fat thin, one of those sorts whose strength comes from hard labor and toil, rather than gym sets or healthy eating. Yet in spite of his heavy-set form, the man always seemed paper-thin to me. Seemed a quarter there, as one member once whispered to me, while the rest of the grievers were half there. Mr. Milton was the worst of us. Does this mean you'd finally like to share with the group? The facilitator asked. This is your 5th appearance. You miss a few groups here and there, but I keep count. And listen, I will always respect your right to share. But how about you start with your name? The man shrugged. Mr. Milton will do. Well, that's fine, that's great. It's just nice to hear you speak. Well, Mr. Milton, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? No pressure, of course. Mr. Milton grumbled. I think I'd rather listen. I find it immensely helpful. Take Sarah, for instance. My eyes widened, and I, having been stuck in an absent-minded state until that moment, tuned more attentively into the conversation. Why did he say my name? Your story, Mr. Milton continued, with magnified eyes studying me. It was so like my own. The emotions you described, the resentment, the anger. You're just like me. And I've needed to find someone like that. Those words really didn't sit well with me. Even written down, they seem untoward, threatening, yet nobody swooped to my aid. As I said, grief is a disarming thing. We all assumed Mr. Milton to simply be like us, heartbroken. He wasn't himself. He could be forgiven for his oddities. My gut said otherwise, and I should have trusted it. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. Well, I'm glad my story helped you. I'm so sorry for your father. Mr. Milton continued softly. Losing a parent is... I'm sorry. Losing anyone is hard, I mumbled. Do you mind me asking who? My wife. Mr. Milton hoarsely interrupted. But that's enough, okay? Lucy nodded hurriedly, interjecting the moment that our conversation risked becoming heated. As I said before, Mr. Milton, there's no pressure to share, but I'm so glad you've opened up just a little bit today. You're right, listening to others is helpful. I just want you to know that we're here for you too. That's nice. The man coldly whispered. His gaze still hadn't unglued from my face, and I was starting to feel quite unsafe. We're all here for each other. I don't know whether the other members of the group were simply unaware of Mr. Milton's sudden and alarming fascination with me, or turning a blind eye given the nature of the group, the nature of our collective trauma. Whatever the case, for the remaining half hour of the session, I barely focused on anything the other members of the group were saying. I looked at the floor and tried to ignore Mr. Milton's unhealthy stare. At 9 o'clock, when the session wrapped up, I hurried across the town building's blackened car park. I rummaged in my pocket for my keys while standing right outside my Nissan Micra, standing so close to freedom, to safety no matter how small and claustrophobic that box. Before I made it inside my vehicle, however, there came what I had feared, what I had predicted, thanks to the raised hairs on the back of my neck. Pursuing footsteps, every woman's greatest fear. And then, wait, yelled Mr. Milton's unmistakably weathered yet insistent voice. Sarah, wait. I turned despite my better judgment and froze to the spot in terror as the wheezing man hurtled towards me. And this is how I go, came that timid and resigned and terrified voice at the back of my mind. Thankfully, he came to a stop about 3 or 4 feet away from me, panting heavily with hands against his knees. Are you okay? I asked weakly, thumbing the button on my car key. I winced a little at the digital bleep, scared that I might elicit some sort of aggravated response from the man before me, that he might become angry simply because I had been trying to run away. But he was focusing on something else. He was a single-minded man. Oh, blimey, you move quickly, Mr. Milton spluttered. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. I have to get home, I choked out, fumbling with the driver's handle behind my back. I watched other members of the bereavement group flock to their vehicles, which settled me a little, but I was aware that the car park would soon be empty, save for Mr. Milton and me. My heart was thumping in my chest. I had to escape while there were still people around. The man struggled to catch his breath. Look, I see that you feel apprehended, but just hear me out. Golly, I'm winded. My mom's waiting for me, I croaked, clicking the door open. It wasn't a lie. I moved back home after Dad had died, as I was worried about my mother living on her own. She had been severely depressed. And then I continued. I would be happy to talk during next week's support. You and your mom need what I'm offering. Mr. Milton half barked. I didn't like the sound of that at all. And most frightening of all, not a soul in the car park seemed to notice. They hadn't noticed my discomfort in the well-lit meeting room, so why did I expect them to notice me in an unlit car park? And before I had a chance to respond, "Have you ever wanted to go back in time?" Mr. Milton asked softly, repeating the question from the group. I gulped. "I'm going to get into my car now because I don't feel comfortable, okay?" "Wait, just wait. It wasn't a rhetorical question," the man said, hurriedly fishing around in his pockets as I lowered myself into the driver's seat. Slow and steady movements seemed safest. "Before you shut the door, just take a look at this." I don't know why I kept the door open. I've never been a curious sort, never more curious than anxious at any rate. Yet on this haunting night, since this strange man had set his sights on me in the meeting room, I'd felt different, felt something awaken within me. That was the truth that I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. Below my fear, I was desperate. Desperate to know why Mr. Milton kept talking about time. In all honesty, from the moment that he asked the group that question, I had already known the truth. That, much as he had claimed, it wasn't rhetorical. And when I eyed the little metallic pebble in the man's palm, I felt something stir and shift deep within me. Felt confirmation that I had been right to push through the terror and give this man the time of night. I don't know what I believed in that moment, but I didn't shut the door. This has to mean something, I told myself. As afraid as I felt, I still reached out and took the device from his hand. "What is it?" I whispered, wanting confirmation that my churning stomach had the right idea. "I think you know." He replied gently, taking a knee outside my door and bringing his face closer to my level. "You feel it, Sarah, just as I did when I took it." My eyes enlarged. "Took it?" The man nodded. 5 weeks ago, I had finally returned to the sales office from bereavement leave. I didn't want to go back to work, but it turned out to be a blessing from the universe. You see, I spotted this object dropping out of a man's pocket. An important man, a contractor from some. Well, I'm not supposed to talk about it, but I knew somehow that I was looking at something which would fix me. So yes, I took it. And I need you to stop pretending, Sarah. I know you want to take it too. You feel it. That's why I chose you." "Chose me?" I internally repeated, face slightly turning a ghostly white. My fear reflex was trying to kick back into action, but I was intoxicated by the stone-like item in my palm. Tears trickled down my cheeks. "It's a way back." "Yes," Mr. Milton whispered. I somehow understood the device just by looking at it, just as you do now. Like it was calling to me, like something from time itself was calling to me, calling me towards the thing. "It's impossible," I whispered, hand trembling as I sat in that driver's seat, eyeing the smooth and silver stone in my hand. "Is it a piece of technology or something else?" The man shrugged. "I don't know." "You seem to know very little," I said. "I know that I squeezed it," he replied, placing a hand over mine to wrap my fingers around the device. It slowed my heart, slowed every organ in my body. The world around me came to a crawl and then a total stop. And after a few moments of pause, the chain of time started to pull backwards, slowly first, then at a pace too blindingly quick to follow. Time raced a year backwards and finally slowed to a stop again. I had reached a time at which Liv was still around. And for 2 blissful days, time passed at a normal rate. I got to relive those hours with my darling wife. But then to my horror, time sped up again. Days and weeks and months raced forwards until I returned to the present day. 5 days ago, right when I had started. I call it a boomerang. It'll fling you back in time, but you'll always be pinged straight back to the starting point. There's no clinging to the past. The boomerang always comes home. I paused for a few moments, trying to listen to the logic that would refute this man's tall tale, but I felt it. He was right. There was something in the device here from time itself that called to me. "Why wouldn't you change the past?" I asked. The man grimaced. "Liv died of stage 4 cancer 6 months ago, Sarah. There would be no saving her even if I were to go 10 or 20 years back in time. It's an inevitability. I can only keep going back 12 months to enjoy a little more time. I may be rewriting the timeline with each trip, but I remember it all. If there were a way to beat the boomerang and stay for more than 2 days at a time, I would take it." "What do you mean? You can just keep using this forever. You'll get to see Liv again and again and again," I said, feeling my skin warm as Mr. Milton held my fingers around the little pebble. I was too awestruck to feel immediate fear, but it was there, lurking beneath. He was far too forceful about me holding onto that thing. "I can't keep doing this forever, Sarah. Look at me. My pale skin, my cracked skin. I know you've noticed me in the groups. I'm not well. The boomerang, it takes a toll on the body. We defy nature when we use it. I might only be able to survive a few more trips. Alternatively, if I could find a way to remain in the past and not be forced to remake the return trip to the present day, I would get another year with Liv. A whole year, Sarah. That's a lot of time. You know, I did try gaming the system, so to speak. I tried using the boomerang a second time once I had reached the past. After bouncing from 2025 to 2024, I thought that I would be able to bounce from 24 to 23, boomerang even farther back in time. But it didn't work. So there's no way of beating it. No way of getting more time with your wife, I asked. Is that why you're giving away such a precious thing to me? Mr. Milton smiled gently but disingenuously. I will never give up, Sarah. I just want help. Help from somebody that I can trust to not steal this precious thing from me. I suppose I want a fresh set of eyes. Maybe you'll see something that I've missed. Some way of spending more time with Liv. Of course, you're right that taking a short break might be good for me. Maybe my body will heal. Maybe I'll survive several more trips with the boomerang. Get more time with her. So what do you say, Sarah? Do you want to use it? How could I say no to even a second of extra time with my dad? I asked. Upon my acceptance, Mr. Milton became a little teary-eyed. I've spent weeks looking for someone to help. You've made me happier than you'll ever know, Sarah. Just make sure you keep the boomerang on your person, okay? I once left it on a coffee table and I was walloped by both a headache and severe nausea once I stepped away from it. I don't know what would have happened if I had kept my distance for too long. Fortunately, these symptoms abated once I had rushed over and picked it back up. I felt my heartbeat begin to slow, and Mr. Milton seemed suddenly to be speaking glacially. Everything was moving glacially, including the upturning of his untrustworthy lips. It's happening, Sarah. You'll see your father soon. You said that he died in October of 24, right? Well, the boomerang will take you back to last June, 4 months before he died. You'll have more than enough time to see him again. Maybe I'll be able to save him, I whispered. Mr. Milton continued smiling that salesman smile and nodded. Maybe. And then the wheel of time finally braked. The man froze with that dreadful expression eyeballing me and the world fell silent. The car stopped in the road. If my heart had been capable of racing, it would have. I've never been so frightened, so uncertain of my own decision. Moments later, all was reversing, even me. Time ripped backwards, and I unleashed a backward scream of horror as my own body retraced its steps, retraced days and then weeks and then months of steps. And as the world rushed past me in an even quickening blur, my ability to scream eventually diminished. My ability to do anything diminished. I was helpless. A rewinding videotape, aware only of pounding pain and the terror of losing one's free will. I felt broken in the face of this almighty power yanking me backwards through time. I believed the trip would kill me. Sarah? I had been pacing through the time-frozen living room of my parents' house weeping, and then I lifted my head to see an impossibility. Not only that time speed had returned to normal, and it started to pass forwards again, but... Dad? I whispered. Mr. Milton had been telling the truth. It was June of 2024. The boomerang had flung me a year backwards, flung me to a time at which my deceased father was still alive. A man who, 4 months from that moment, would die in a motorway collision with a drunk driver. After managing to convince my parents that my tears in the living room had just stemmed from a hormonal moment, I set my sights on the task at hand, saving my father from his fate 4 months from then. I tried to convince him to sell the car. I couldn't think of any other way to prevent a catastrophe that would take place 4 months from that moment. I thought of the butterfly effect, that if he changed to something as drastic as his vehicle, maybe he would never end up on that road in October, never be killed by that inebriated lunatic. But Dad said that his current car was fine and that he didn't have the money for an upgrade anyway. Wouldn't until, at the very least, the end of the year. That caused my stomach to lurch, but I told myself that even something as small as having that conversation with him might alter the course of history, might prevent him from driving along that fateful road in 12 weeks. Instead, I decided to cherish the time that we had together, take a page out of Mr. Milton's book. We played football in the garden, which was something that amused my mother. A 20-something and a 50-something kicking a ball around haphazardly on the grass. And in my defense, I could feel time starting to pull me forwards again. Things were starting to move too quickly, but that was okay. I would ask Mr. Milton to use the boomerang again. I would see my dad as many times as I could before I started to feel the toll on my body. However, then came the nightmare that would make me swear to never turn back the clock again. I saw him through the slats of the fence surrounding my parents' garden, a black figure, like a silhouette but one that had lost its clarity around the edges. It had started to fuzz and buzz with a sort of paper-cracking frequency that pained my ears. I started to whimper, and my ever-quickening father noticed. Upset that you're losing, he teased, 1 foot atop the ball. I think we're at 5-0 to me now. You're just as bad as you were when she was a kid, Mom scoffed. Let her score. Where would be the satisfaction in that? Dad laughed and then he stopped when he realized that my whimpering was genuine, and he turned to follow my gaze. What the? Dad whispered. My mom screamed. What is that? They could see him too. The buzzing, crackling, glitching silhouette behind the fence. And he was only starting to crackle more quickly and feverishly as the time speed of the world quickened. Our 3 screams merged into tiny, high-pitched, fast squeals as the figure began to ascend the fence, moving at a frightening pace. And I, in spite of the world moving so quickly, did not seem to have a brain capable of thinking quickly enough to react, quickly enough to kick my body into action. The black shape tore across the grass, sunlight from above not even scratching the surface of his void-like form. My dad disappeared, my mom disappeared. Everything but that thing disappeared, and I couldn't tell what was happening. I felt the world and its colors start to merge and blur as the man approached. The last thing that I saw was that blackness filling my vision. The last thing I felt was one of its hands clawing at me, tearing through my shirt in flash. I screamed, this time forwards and quickly as days, weeks, and months raced forwards. I don't know what I saw on that day. Don't know how I survived it. But when I returned to the present day 1 year later, I was no longer sitting in my car. I was standing outside the town building following a bereavement session, the heartbreaking sign that I hadn't saved my father. And Mr. Milton was standing in front of me. "You're back," he murmured. "That was risky. God, what a rush. I have memories of 2 different timelines, 2 different courses of history. It must be the boomerang. Must be something it does to the people who use it." I was trembling as I handed the device back to him, and then I looked down at my blouse. With ginger hands, I lifted it to reveal 3 claw-shaped scars that had healed across my midsection. Mr. Milton's eyes widened. "What happened to you?" I started to blubber. It attacked me. Why didn't you tell me about it?" "It?" the man asked, puzzled. "A silhouette," I wheezed. "A figure, it came for me." His eyes took their turn to widen. "You've been talking about that over the past weeks." "What?" I whimpered. "While you were boomeranging forward in time, I mean," Mr. Milton explained. "We may rush forwards through time, but we still live it, still experience it, though perhaps only in a ghostly sense. After all, until the day that I first talked to you, I'm sure I didn't quite seem myself now, did I? Not quite present, I mean. Anyway, you won't remember the new events of the past year for, anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours. It takes the brain time to catch up. It's hard to remember the things we've done while racing forwards at such speed. Anyway, you talked of a black shape watching you, said that it tried to kill you in your parents' garden, and disappeared into thin air once the boomerang started pulling you forwards. You were hazy about what had happened after." "Wait a minute," I interrupted. "Why is my father still dead? You implied that even though I moved at a speed too fast to remember, I still lived through the last year, right? Well, why didn't I do something in October to stop Dad from getting killed by that driver? I had all of my memories from the future. I could have done something." "It wasn't the driver that killed him, Sarah," Mr. Milton whispered, looking down at the boomerang with something verging on shame, but then he shrugged it off. "It was that thing in the garden, on that day." My eyes widened and I dropped to the floor. All of the pain rushed back to me, the grief. It felt twofold from 2 different deaths of my father, 2 timelines that I remembered. "Why have you done this to me? I don't ever want to see you again, and if you have any sense, you'll destroy that boomerang, or bury it so nobody else is ever tempted to." "It didn't just kill your father," Mr. Milton continued, eyes pooling with tears. "I'm sorry, Sarah." And then I remembered the other horror. 3 weeks after Dad had been killed by that thing, Mom had been driven by madness that not only is passing but had seen a force that she did not understand. She had taken her own life, and I didn't blame her. The nightmare had fractured me too. I remembered my dad lying in a bloody pool on the grass. The silhouette had gone, not of its own volition. Mr. Milton was right that the boomerang, upon flinging me forwards, had seemed to expel the creature. Moments before, it likely would have torn me to shreds too. "And I'm not being forthcoming with you," the man quietly admitted. "I've seen this figure too, countless times." I looked up at him with eyes of rage. "You didn't tell me? You just let me use that thing knowing that I was putting myself in danger, knowing that I might." "It never hurt me." Mr. Milton roared. It only watched, always watched, never touched. Like I said, I began stepping down from the town building, eyes set on my car. I don't ever want to see you again. But your mother, he whispered. We've been talking about this for weeks, that as soon as you had finished boomeranging back to the present, you would go back in time, try to save them both this time. She was never meant to die. And you killed her, I screamed, face stained with tears. You came into my life 2 days ago, or what feels like 2 days ago, and you promised to bring my father back to me, but instead you took both him and my mother away. We have to try, Sarah, Mr. Milton insisted, following me across the unlit car park once again. That was what you said. Why do you care? I cried, turning to face him. I didn't learn anything. I didn't find some way for you to get more time with your wife. That boomerang is going to kill you. One try was enough to nearly kill me. Listen, when your memories come back to you and you remember the months of grief over your mother, you'll also remember that you wanted to try again, Mr. Milton said. Maybe that ghostly, half-present version of me wanted that. You're right. I saw you during the sessions, zonked out and inhuman. And even now when you seem fully present, you still give me the creeps. So don't come near me ever. Keep it, Mr. Milton said, thrusting the boomerang into my hand. I'll see you at the support group in 2 weeks, and we'll talk more about how you're feeling then. I wanted to thrust the device back into his hands, but the man stepped aside to let me get to my vehicle, and I wasn't going to pass up the opportunity to find the escape from him. I got home, collapsed in bed, and rotted away there for the entire weekend. The device sat on my bedside table mocking me, begging to be used again. But every glimpse of the red scarring on my stomach while I showered reminded me that the horror that I had endured was real, that I wasn't going to let that happen ever again. As the next 2 weeks went by, I focused on work and friends and focused on the 2 sets of timelines in my head. My journey into the past had changed quite a few small things in my daily life, dynamics with relationships and so forth. But I still remembered the old events of the past year. I hoped those old, outdated recollections of a dead timeline would pass in time. The worst part of this flooding of memories from the new timeline was that I realized Mr. Milton had been telling the truth. I did have the urge to use the boomerang again, an urge to save my mother, even after how horribly wrong it had gone with my father. But he was meant to die, I told myself. My mom wasn't, and that was what spurred me to do it. Mr. Milton pulled me aside at the end of the bereavement group session, and there was a smile on his face. Even less pleasant than the first time, there was a smugness to it. I knew you'd come around, he said before I had even spoken a word. A couple of weeks with the boomerang is all it. This will be the last time, I warned. I'm going to find a way to save my mother and then I'll never use it again, okay? You do what you want with it, but never involve me. Mr. Milton nodded. And do you mind, just before you go back, letting me use it? Letting me go on another trip to see my wife? I frowned. Now that I've used the boomerang, I remember everything, don't I? So this time, if you change the timeline, I'll remember the old one, right? The man sighed. Yes, Sarah. I'd rather not to remember 2, no, 3 different versions of the past year's history, I said. He groaned. There are only ever minuscule differences, Sarah. Changing my history will hardly change yours, despite our living in the same city. Besides, the memories of slight differences in those old overwritten timelines will fade with time. How clearly do you remember specific events from specific days 5 or 6 years ago? Just allow an old man this, won't you? I had barely handed the boomerang to him before the world had shifted. cut and transitioned to me sitting in the driver's seat of my car with Mr. Milton sitting next to me. "Jesus," I gasped. "Thank you," he whispered. "It's been a long 2 weeks. I needed my fix." I remembered a year's worth of, as he said, minor events happening differently, but still 3 different timelines from a single year. That's a lot of overlapping and confusing information to hold in one's head. And just remember that the old timelines no longer happened. You'll forget them. So, what's your plan? How will you save your mother? I sniffled, eyeing the boomerang in my palm and trying to focus simply on the pitter-patter of rain against the windscreen. I don't know. I'll talk to her, tell her it's okay. That will overcome what happened to Dad. But she doesn't need to hurt herself. Mr. Milton nodded. "So, you're gonna go to her house and talk to her?" I shook my head. "No, she'll be at my flat in the city. I remember now. I moved her there after that thing had killed Dad. She couldn't stay there after what had happened to him, and I wanted to keep an eye on her. But it seems that I still didn't do enough." "Oh, you will this time. But maybe you want to take her somewhere to clear her head. It mustn't be good for her to be cooped up in an inner city apartment block." "I don't know," I sighed. "What about the beach? The theme park has some great rides." "Yeah, she has always liked that place." "Right," the man roared triumphantly. "Well, that's where you'll take her then. I'll see you in just a moment and everything will be back to normal. You and your mom will both be alive and well." I nodded, smiled, and then squeezed the boomerang in my hand. And it started again. The slowing, the stopping, the reversing, all accompanied by a throbbing headache and terror like nothing that I had ever experienced. And then I was back in my city flat, cuddling my despondent mother on the sofa. It took a lot of persuading to get her to go to the beach with me, but it was a lovely day in late June of 2024. A day not to be wasted, as I told her. And being out and about with me did trigger sort of a mom mode. She fussed over whether I had remembered to apply sun cream. Perhaps she had been welcoming the distraction. I knew that 2 days was very little time to change the mindset of a woman only a week away from taking her own life, which was why I'd already started to work on my failsafe. Before being flung back into my own time in the present, I was going to have my mother sectioned. That would keep her safe for the next year, surely. I could feel my heart beating a little quicker at that prospect, the prospect of betraying my mother like that. And this was how I saw it, but the root of my anxiety was deeper than that. Something was looming over me, a heavier shade of black. And as I waited for my mother outside the theme park's toilets, something entirely unexpected happened. "Sarah," the voice rang out from behind me. I spun my head and widened my eyes. It was Mr. Milton, and he knew me. 10 months before even attending the bereavement support group for the first time, this man knew me. "It can't be," I whispered, realizing what that meant. And the man stopped in front of me, panting. "Sarah, you okay? Do you have the boomerang?" "What's happening? Is something wrong?" "Do you have it?" he screamed. "Yes," I yelled, fishing the device out of my pocket in a panic, expecting him to say that all had somehow gone wrong again. But then Mr. Milton's demeanor shifted. His hand shot forwards and plucked the device from my palm, and he smiled. And that was when I took a closer look at him. I saw his neck covered in gaping wounds, 1,000 tiny perforations, as if he had started to rip apart at the seams. There were similar cuts on his hands, which were cradling my boomerang lovingly. When I thought about it, I realized that he had been covering up his body with gloves, thick sleeves, and even a buttoned-up shirt at bereavement sessions. "How long have you been like this?" I whispered. You were right, it's killing you. And how are you even here? This is before we met." He smiled. "It took weeks for me to find the right kind of person. A person desperate enough to do this thing. You have to be deranged to put your body through such torture, Sarah. Mentally unwell. Just like us." "What's happening? I don't understand." "Well, it seems as if the future version of me told you to come to the theme park," he said. "And you did just that, making it easy for me to find you. Easy for me to try something new." And then Mr. Milton dipped his hand into his pocket and produced a second boomerang. I felt my head strain, felt the world itself strain. These weren't two unique objects. It was the same boomerang. That's a paradox," I whispered. "I'm counting on it. Time whispers, Sarah, you just have to listen. Listen to the secrets that it doesn't want us to hear." "What are you going to do?" I wheezed, massaging my head. "I need that back. I'm already starting to feel off." "I'm sorry, Sarah," the man hissed, seeming less human with each new meeting of him. "I'm going to use them both simultaneously, and if that doesn't work, I'll find a way to use 3 and then 4 and then 5. I need to confuse time itself. That is the way to beat it. This truth was spoken to me." "Spoken to you? You've gone insane." "I need more time with her. If this works, I'll boomerang to 2023 and then back to the spot in 2024. And I'll trick time into thinking that this day is my present. Do you understand? I won't be sent back to 2025. Time will pass normally from this day. Right now, June 24. I'll get to enjoy at a normal speed these last 6 precious months with my beautiful wife." "Please," I begged, my head throbbing. "Don't take it away from me." But Mr. Milton ignored me, and as he squeezed the 2 boomerangs, one in each palm, I became aware of a crackling in the air. That papery sound in my ears. Became aware of a buzzing and fuzzing around the outline of his body, which was starting to darken. The silhouette. I shrieked as I contemplated what this man was going to do to me, worse than the pain that he had inflicted upon me by handing me the boomerang in the first place. He was leaving me there. That black shape vaporized. He became immaterial right before my eyes, slipping into some hidden crevice of the air, of reality itself. And then, mere moments later, I felt it. The headache, the nausea, all of the symptoms that Mr. Milton had warned would come if I were to be too far from the device while, as he called it was boomeranging. Again, I prepared to die, but there are more terrifying fates than even death, than even the cracking, silhouetted form of Mr. Milton, hunting me through space and time. My heart continued to quicken, and then began this terrifying new phase of my existence that I've come to call rubber banding. You see, without the boomerang in my vicinity, I did not ping back to the present day. I didn't return to my normal life. I didn't manage to see whether I would save my mother with that one lovely day at the theme park. Didn't even see whether Mr. Milton had ever succeeded with his attempt to trick time and to get to spend 6 more months with his wife. Instead, there came pain more tremendous than the agony that I had endured during the original boomerang trip. The world soared past me again, and there came an unfathomable blur of color and sound and cramping organs and the inability to scream no matter how hard I tried. When time slowed to a crawl, I found myself in some wasteland of a city. Some dystopian, uninhabited version of my home city. But what I feared more than the crumbling buildings and overgrown streets were the cut marks on my hands, running through my flesh, just like those on Mr. Milton. Time had physically torn through my flesh, and I feared I would become him given enough time. You see, the boomerang had always pushed me through time within my own body, but now my body had clearly been removed from its time, and that horror was too much for even the universe to bear. After a few hours of lying in the rubble of some urban tip, sobbing at the impossibility of it all, the merciless teeth of time tore through my flimsy flesh again, punished me for my sacrilegious act against reality itself. The world swirled and I found myself in the distant past, in Victorian London. My hands looked bloodier, more cut and more bruised. After another few hours of skulking and hiding in some ginnel, the world shifted again, and then I found myself here, back in the present. That was an hour ago. At first, I thought maybe that it had all come to an end. You see, I've returned to the present even without the boomerang. You'd think that would mean that time would flow naturally through me once more. But I still feel that quickening of my heart. Feel that another ping to some distant time, perhaps at the heat death of the universe, lurks just around the corner. And that terrifies me, as I won't survive more than another round or two of rubber banding. I'm covered in deep gashes across my body, and I think that I might have some fractured ribs because I'm struggling to move. At first, the most haunting question was, what has become of the monster who used to be Mr. Milton? Now it is, how long before time rips me to shreds? Sometimes life takes a left turn. It can happen so abruptly that weeks later you're still not sure that it happened. My life took a turn like that last autumn. What I didn't know was that it would keep turning, making that left turn into a spiral that sent me to the brink of madness. I come from a close-knit family. We were raised in Sioux Falls, but we moved after my dad lost his job. There was me, my younger sister Jody, and my big brother Alan. And despite us taking very different paths in life, the three of us were always close. Long after my parents retired and moved to the West Coast, we stayed behind. My sister pursued a legal career as a prosecutor, while I got a job working on the power grid. Alan got a managing job at a bottling plant. For years, we lived close to one another, having dinner once a week and celebrating the big holidays at my sister's place. It was the kind of relationship where I might have had a rough day at work and would know exactly who to call about it. I was having one of those days, a late September night last year. I tried calling Jody about it, but she wouldn't pick up. It wasn't unusual. She would always forget her cell phone in her car. I decided to pick up some takeout and drop by her place. When I got there, her door was locked. I looked in one of the windows and I could see that the lights were on. There was no car in the driveway, so I was a bit confused. Using my backup key, I opened the front door, only to see my brother Alan in the hallway holding a bloody knife. He turned to me with tears coming down his face. "Call the police," he cried. "Please, call the police." Once the police got there, life took that left turn at a brisk angle. Alan was taken into custody. My parents flew in overnight. I saw the police strip Jody's home apart and place the pieces into evidence bags as investigators cataloged their lives. The working theory was that Alan was involved with some bad people who had asked him to influence his prosecutor sister to drop a case. Most of it was circumstantial. I had to juggle daily updates and demands from a dozen directions. I was going to have to testify, there was no doubt about it. I would have to tell them exactly what I saw and what happened that night. I didn't know what to think. Alan swore his innocence, but I had seen something in his eyes, a tiny spark of darkness just behind the tears. Maybe him being a murderer wasn't the whole truth, but I don't think it was a complete lie. As you can imagine, I was in a dark place. I was reeling from losing my sister, but I had to come to terms with the fact that I was about to lose a brother as well. And somewhere in all of that, I had to make sure that I didn't lose myself along the way. Now, I only touched on this briefly, but I have a pretty important job. Important, but ultimately dull. I work in the energy sector. The technical term for my role is Grid Reliability Analyst. I track how power is used to provide reliability reports and investigate outages in relation to equipment failure and weather. I'm part of a team that works with spotting inconsistencies and setting up maintenance plans. Most of my job is spent at our office, measuring and predicting patterns. Whenever something goes wrong, we can point to when, why, and where. We have plenty of people to report to, and I'll be the first to admit that this job can be duller than a rock on the best of days. But that's the thing with maintenance. You want it to be dull. It's when it's exciting that you have a problem. After taking some time off, I got back to work. I couldn't stand the quiet of staying home. My boss decided to cut down on my hours until after the trial, which was still a couple of weeks away. I had to beg him to get anything to do at all. He had decided to give me something that had been on his desk for a while, but that he hadn't had the chance to prioritize. Something that he wouldn't mind me messing up. So, there was this thing that we had had for internal review for a while. There's this particular area of the state where residents have reported minor brownouts. Not complete power outages, but instances where voltages would suddenly dip. Not enough for the streetlights to go dark, but enough to reset the timer on your microwave. An inconvenience at most. These brownouts followed a sort of pattern, but they weren't mechanical. We couldn't identify any equipment failure, and the time would differ by a matter of hours, sometimes days. It had been going on for a little over 2 months, but nobody was taking it seriously. It was happening in an area where a little less than 200 people lived, so it wasn't exactly at the top of the list. This was the job handed to me as a sort of busy work. I got it with a do-what-you-can kind of attitude. I think my boss, along with my coworkers, sort of figured this was a temporary thing that would fix itself over time. And I mean, I could see why they thought so. But they were wrong. The problem affected several substations. It wasn't mechanical in nature, and it wasn't the result of hardware failure. That was the first thing we had checked. Instead, it seemed to follow an irregular pattern. And by measuring the times when the brownout struck our substations, I managed to triangulate a rough area of origin, a space just outside the town of Hilltop. I figured we might be looking at someone leeching off the grid, but they'd have to be pretty advanced to do it at this level. It was nice to get out of the office and do some legwork for once. I lived out of my car for a couple of days, going from substation to substation, talking to maintenance workers. I rarely get to flex the kind of authority that we have, so it was kind of empowering to show off my case binder and be the I'm the one asking the questions here kind of guy. More often than not, we're punching bags, having to answer questions about why there are power outages during storms. Yeah, I've written reports on it. By golly, if only there was a way to predict the relationship between tall trees, harsh storms, and power lines. But this case was a bit different. I didn't get that far, so I decided to do a little digging outside my usual boundaries. I drove out to that area to see for myself what exactly we were dealing with. I drove around for a bit, stopping to ask some of the locals about the brownouts. A lot of them had noticed it. One of them had even called us about it a couple of months prior. It always happened on the weekend, and it usually only lasted for a few minutes. But that's as far as I got. A dead end. There were no strange shacks set up in the fields, no illegal cables being run from the power lines, and nothing like that. I was about to give up when I stopped at the local gas station for a refill. Now, here's a trick that I've learned. If you want to know what's happening in a small town, ask the guy at the convenience store or the gas station. They see when people pull up at strange hours of the day, or whoever's buying the weird pack of condoms when their spouse is out of town. On a hunch, I asked if they had noticed anything unusual around the time of the brownouts. The guy behind the counter, a 17-year-old with black hair covering his triple lip piercing, shrugged it off. People rarely stop on the weekends, he said, except for like one guy. He always gets a Hershey bar. Curious, I asked about this weird guy who had kept stopping by. I made some notes and cross-referenced the dates with the brownouts. The guy working the counter could personally attest to this person having stopped by at least 6 times, and every time correlated with a brownout. It might have been a coincidence, but it was something. And there was one more thing. He drove a van. It was around this time that I got the trial date, and got an email about it while I was writing my notes for the report. It was short notice, a couple of weeks. It felt like a gut punch, turning my blood into ice. Like reality came knocking on the door, reminding me that I wasn't a cool secret agent. I was a sad middle child whose family was bursting at the seams. But I had a job to do, and yes, it wasn't a big deal. I was way overplaying my hand. But I had to keep myself busy or I'd spend the next 2 weeks staring at my shower wall, trying not to dry heave. This was my way of dealing with things, and I'd be damned if I just let it go because of an email. I could, but I wouldn't. Instead, I waited until the following weekend. The patterns were lining up and I figured I would see for myself. That Saturday, I planned an honest-to-God stakeout from my car. It wasn't as exciting as it sounds, but I had an audiobook to keep me company. I don't even remember what it was. I just needed a fresh voice in my head to keep the anxiety out. I almost forgot what I was there for when later that evening, I spotted a van rolling into the gas station. There was a man in a white hoodie and a black baseball cap with his hands in his pocket. I watched as he got him some gas and bought himself a Hershey bar. The teenager behind the counter had been right. There had only been a handful of people who had stopped by all day. This guy was an exception. Now I know that I overstepped my boundaries. I'm not a cop or a government agent. Most of my work is administrative. But at this point I was curious and I wanted a final answer. What the hell was this guy up to? I followed him at a distance. I don't think he noticed. He took a left turn out past a dirt road leading into a space between 2 farmlands. I kept going forward until he was out of sight and then turned the car around. I parked down the road, called up some of the folks at the office and waited. If my calculations were correct, we would be looking at a brownout shortly. After about 20 minutes, something happened. I was expecting maybe some flickering lights. What I wasn't expecting was interference with battery-powered devices. My phone got disconnected along with my car stereo. My battery stalled, but only for a minute or so. Once everything came back online, my colleagues confirmed it. Readings had dropped sharply in that area. Suspicions confirmed. I got out of the car and walked down the dirt road, keeping my phone close. I needed answers. The guy had parked in a small space between 2 farms. There was a small dip in the road causing rainwater from the previous night to pool a little, making the solid dirt into a muddy manure-smelling slugfest. He must have been an idiot driving down this road. There was no way he wouldn't get stuck. And lo and behold, when I spotted him, his van was spinning tires. He wasn't going anywhere. I walked up to the passenger side and knocked on the window. The skinny face of a man in his late 20s popped up, looking over the edge of a pair of thin glasses. For a moment, he seemed to weigh whether to be angry or terrified. He settled on the ladder and pressed the gas pedal harder, digging himself further down. You're not getting out anytime soon, I said, knocking again. You're gonna need something for traction. Go away, he called back. I'm with transmission operations, I said. I got some questions about your power usage. That shut him up. He pushed down on the gas one last time, but we could both hear the spin of the tire going lower and lower. He was gonna have to get out and he was going to need my help. Even through the door, I could hear him sigh. He got out and faced me. We were about the same length, but I had a good 50 pounds on him. Something about his appearance made me think of a goat, like his nose was too far down his face. His oversized glasses seemed to agree, as he had to constantly push them back up. You care to tell me how and why you're causing these outages? I asked. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, looking for something loose to cram under his tire. I waved my binder at him. I got the charts, I said, and right now I'm just asking questions. But I might have to send somebody else to ask those questions if you're not inclined to answer. You do that, he nodded. Sounds fun. He broke off a plank from a fence and stuck it under his back tire. That ought to be enough to give him a boost. I shrugged him off and stepped back to take a picture of his license plate. That made him snap to attention. You can't do that. It's a free country. Yeah, but my car sure as shit ain't. He stepped back out and walked up to me, facing me head on. He was all bark, no bite, and I could tell it from a mile away. If you want to give me a ticket, then give me a ticket. I ain't got time for this. Though I'm sure the sheriff will be glad to help you with that. You got nothing. I got evidence of you messing with the power grid, I said, tapping my binder. That carries a lot of charges and a couple hefty fines. Well, that's not my fault, he groaned. I ain't doing that. I rolled my eyes and stepped back. I had had enough of our back and forth. You can argue that in court. All of a sudden, his face dropped. Every hint of a smile died and a panic welled up. I could see it even in the dim moonlight. He stammered a little and followed me a couple of steps. Now hold on, he said. I'm sure we can work something out. I don't do bribes. What about proof? You do proof. I stopped and turned. He held his arms out in a shrug. It ain't my fault. If I show you, you can't do anything, right? Not quite what I expected, but it was a start. I wasn't about to get into a stranger's van, so I stayed at a safe distance. When he opened those doors, it was like looking into another world. There was a computer set up with a 90s-style satellite dish roughly bolted to the floor. I could see a couple of cameras, some snacks, and about a dozen cables running to a handful of machines right behind the driver's seat. And in bold, neon letters just above his computer were the words, "No future." To his credit, at least it was clean. I'm doing a calibration, he said. That's evidence. Evidence of what? Evidence that I'm not the one doing this. Just look, all right. He got the Hershey bar from his pocket, moved up to his computer, and entered a 6-digit passcode. A blinking command prompt showed up. He put on a cheap, sun-faded headset and adjusted his microphone, and then he spoke out loud. A query, he said, his cadence slow and clear. Am I going to eat this Hershey bar? I heard a bleep from my phone as the battery complained. The screen flickered. Seconds later, 3 symbols appeared on the screen. I-97. That means yes to a probability of 97%, he continued. He opened his Hershey bar and took a big bite out of it, nodding at me. But you caused the outage, I said. My phone buzzed again. No, I asked a question, he argued. The system I connected to, now that's the culprit. And what system is that? You tell me, I didn't make it. Who the hell did? What is this? He finished his Hershey bar and wiped his hands on his jeans. He rolled the question on his tongue for a bit before giving me a shrug. Honestly, I'm about as lost as you are. He introduced himself as Kibble. He described himself as a digital finance enthusiast, running a service called No Future. Apparently, he sold financial advice online under the guise of being able to predict the stock and crypto market. Sure, he said as he wandered around the back of the van, I can take my own advice and earn some bucks in a couple of months, but it's way faster to just get paid for sharing advice. All the cash and none of the risk. You sure that's legal? Well, technically it's not financial advice, he corrected himself. I'm a soothsayer. I sell predictions like a psychic. You're a crypto psychic. Oh shit, that's a much cooler title. He tapped the sign, letting the neon flicker a little. I'm not lying about this part though. I know future, it works. I don't know how, but it does. How can you not know how it works? Because it's some satellite shit, alright? I got the login info from an estate sale. A 70s tech wizard type stuff. And that's what's causing the outage. Satellites. I told you it ain't me. I helped Kibble get his van out of the mud. I got a chance to take a closer look at his gear. His setup was very basic. An old desktop computer running Windows XP hooked up to a car battery. All the system needed to do was run the equivalent of a localized search, so it didn't require a lot. But interacting with the system was so volatile that it would fry his computer every 3 or 4 prompts, forcing him to get new hardware frequently. And that's why he drove out to the middle of nowhere. He was hoping not to damage any other electronics. Once Kibble got talking, it was hard to get him to stop. You gotta ask simple questions, yes and no binary stuff. You have to relate it to a person, and you gotta ask it about something that hasn't happened yet. That's impossible. I'd invite you to try, but you wouldn't want to cause another critical power failure, would you? He let the words hang in air quotes. I considered it. And the outage wasn't particularly harmful, and I was getting curious. I decided to humor him. Why'd you prompt it about the Hershey bar? I asked. Calibration, Kibble said. I'm always gonna eat the Hershey bar, and it's a way to see the indexer hasn't drifted to a worse slice. 97% is as good as it gets. I deliberated what to prompt it. Something related to a person, a binary answer, something in the future. All my thoughts had centered around my brother, but I didn't trust this guy for a second. It had to be something impersonal but measurable. I had an idea. Ask it if I'm going to see a dog tomorrow, I said. Prompt that. That's it, he laughed. Out of all possible questions, that's what you want to know. Just ask it. Fine, but then you get off my back. He went through the procedure again, 6-digit login, adjusting his headset. Didn't you need my name? I asked. It understands context. He turned to the computer and spoke out loud. Query. Will the person next to me see a dog tomorrow? The lights flickered again, my phone beeped, and this time something popped inside the van like a burst light bulb. The screen showed 3 symbols. I-97. And then the screen turned dark. Kibble spat and swore as he ran up to check the cables. The computer was as expected, fried. It says yes, 97% accuracy, he said. It's basically guaranteed unless you affect the outcome. So I'm gonna see a dog tomorrow, that's happening. It looks like it. Even if I actively avoid it. What can I tell ya? It points to yes. Trust the process. With that, Kibble and I called it a night. He drove off and I was left standing there with an expression on my face that could only be described as puzzled. I felt like I had gotten scammed. I checked the area for loose cables or something, but I couldn't find anything that pointed to him actively leeching off the power in the area. Maybe this system that he was interacting with was really the cause, but there was no way to know. And coming home that night, I lay awake wondering what I would have asked if I had another chance. It all came back to questions about Alan. Was he going to get convicted? Would he face the death penalty? Was he even guilty to begin with? I couldn't stop running the questions back and forth, picturing the stupid neon sign above Kibble's workstation. No future. The next day I stayed inside. I had decided that I was going to try not to see a dog. I was actively going to try and avoid the prediction of his machine just to see if I could. I wasn't feeling all that well anyway. My parents were constantly updating me with info from the trial, begging me to speak to the lawyer to prep for my brother's defense. They were adamant about him being innocent. I couldn't tell them the honest truth and that I wasn't sure. The stress of it all almost gave me stomach ulcers. I spent most of the day indoors watching old TV shows and clearing out my cupboard. I had some beef noodles and I fell asleep on the couch, putting my phone on mute. It wasn't until later in the evening when I heard a car horn that I got up. Turns out when you don't answer your parents, they come knocking. I won't bore you with the details of our conversation. They were there to discuss the trial and to scold me for turning off my phone. But what was peculiar about that encounter was something that they had brought along. It turns out they were dog sitting for a friend. What are the odds? Well, 97%, I suppose. I was gonna have to talk to Kibble again. He agreed to meet me at a Waffle House later that week. I offered to buy him dinner and he warned me that he wasn't holding back. He was getting all the bells and whistles and an extra portion for later. Strange behavior for someone who considered themselves a financial genie. Kibble was wearing the same kind of hoodie but not the same one. It looked a bit newer. He probably had a bunch of them. Kibble seemed to know the guy working at the counter and they stopped to chit-chat for a solid 5 minutes before he sat down at my table. Once he did, he seemed a little more relaxed than we last spoke. "Oh, don't tell me," he said. "You saw a dog." "I did." "You were trying not to, but you did." "Yeah, that's right." He slapped his hands together and grinned, pointing at me, and he nodded. "I told you it works. No future, my man, no future." "I have a couple questions to ask about your computer," I said. "It's personal and very important." "Well, what do I get out of it?" "First, I'm not turning you in, and second, I help you find an isolated spot where you don't reset any DVD players. People still got DVD players. The DVD, microwave, Blu-ray, or VCR isn't the point. The point is that you can't go messing with people's electronics. I can help you find a spot." "Go on." It was a fair deal. This would stop the brownouts and it would allow him to work unimpeded. I just had to find a blind spot. It wasn't that difficult, but it would probably be way out in the weeds. But first, I had to get some answers. Kibble told me a little bit about himself in between his massive waffle servings. He was a computer science major who had to drop out to care for his dad. Once his dad passed, he had inherited a bunch of debt. Most of the estate had to go up for auction. The only thing he managed to save was a couple of old boxes of work stuff. He used to work with a guy who was into computers back in the late 70s, Kibble explained. That guy worked with a group at Stanford. They had access to some strange shit, and some of it was boxed away with Dad's things. For the first time, Kibble looked a bit uncomfortable. He lowered his voice. "I know enough to work with it, but I'm telling you, this shit is weird. I tried running some diagnostics and it's like you can't even tell what it is. Some kind of hard drive, but it's bigger than anything I've seen. And it contains magic future data. No man, it contains noise. It's like radiation, random shit. Well, then how do you use it?" "Honestly, I barely do anything. I got an algorithm that takes as big a chunk as it's allowed to and checks for patterns. It just works. That's it." He munched down on another waffle, shrugging my question off. "That's it. I have to calibrate it every now and then and it just works. A vast majority of Kibble's predictions had come true, but they hadn't hit it big yet. While some stock and coin had increased and decreased as predicted, it hadn't been as dramatic as he had hoped. While he had earned enough to keep going, he wasn't expecting a big payout anytime soon. Giving trading tips under the guise of being an insider genius had earned him more than investing ever did, and he was closing in on enough cash to buy his dad's house. But for now, he had to keep working. I didn't say too much about what I needed to ask his computer. I wasn't sure myself. I had to get some clarity about Alan and the case, but how to form that question was another thing entirely. Kibble didn't need to know the details. He seemed genuinely curious, but I tried not to let him know too much. That following weekend, I showed him a space where he could work unhindered. There's this valley spot just southwest of the Run-Along River where there is no arable land. At worst, we would be inconveniencing a couple of hikers, but it would require a 30-minute walk. Kibble wasn't too happy about that, but he had a setup that was meant to be portable. I had to drag the satellite dish though. We waited until late in the afternoon and made our way down the trail. Kibble had the computer in a backpack along with a power supply and a couple of backup drives. I carried the dish and a bag of cables just in case a couple got fried. My forearms were burning up just after 5 minutes of walking, and I was sweating through my clothes after 5 more. But we were getting there. Crossing the river while carrying electronics wasn't a big hit though, but we made it. Along that trail there is a field. According to my calculations, it was the perfect spot. We set up the computer and the power source on a big flat rock. Putting down the satellite dish felt like completing some kind of cosmic repentance, like I had purified myself in biblical labor. No way I was carrying it back. Kibble hooked it all up and input the 6-digit code. The satellite dish hummed a little as blue texture noise flickered against the black backdrop of the screen, spreading outward like a pixelated sunflower. Kibble ran a couple of pre-made scripts that in turn set up a blank prompt window. He handed me the headset. "Now, before you say anything, I gotta make sure you understand how it works," he said. "It's gotta be a yes or a no kind of deal. Something relating to a person. Something that hasn't happened yet. If you tell me what it is, I can come up with a question for you that works." "I got it," I said. "If you wouldn't mind, I need some space." Kibble rolled his eyes and wandered a bit further down the path, leaving me on my own. I put on the headset and adjusted the microphone. I could hear the static of my breath reflected back to me through the cheap plastic. I had seen him do this. I could do it. "Query," I said. The system woke up. A static reflection of my voice echoed back to me as the word appeared on screen. It was listening, but how? It didn't matter. I asked the first thing that came to mind. Will my testimony put my brother on death row? The words appeared and the system chugged. I waited for the 3 symbols to appear, but nothing happened. I waited for a couple of seconds and then I took the headphones off. "Kibble," I called out. "It's not working." I could hear the computer chugging along, but it wasn't doing anything. Kibble came jogging back, calling out to me. "What did you ask it?" "I asked about a verdict, a court case." "What about a court case?" "Like if my testimony will change the outcome." Kibble came up to me, scratching his head. "So you asked if your involvement would change the outcome of the verdict," he mumbled. Hold on. That's a self-referential event." "So you did that too with the Hershey bar." "Yeah, but my outcome doesn't change when I know it. I'll eat the damn thing anyway. Same with the dog, you were gonna see it no matter what. But for this, hold on." He scratched his head, looking at the screen. The computer was still humming, the lights were blinking, but nothing was being shown. "It's a loop," he said. "It's stuck in a loop." Giving you an answer would change the outcome, forcing it to recheck the calibration. It's gonna throw an error. And then, like clockwork, it did. The background changed to a sharp blue and then a black square as if trying to show every symbol at once. And then a barrage of text, code, line after line after line, all ending with 100%. Dozens, hundreds. Kibble turned pale. That's impossible. It's all outcomes, all of them. What? Kibble hurried up to the computer and pulled the plug. That didn't stop the symbols from running down the screen, line by line by line. Nothing ever gets 100%. Kibble muttered, "It can't. It's impossible." I blinked. Something was wrong. I thought back on that night, the keys in the door, the click of the lock. But this time when I opened it, it wasn't Alan standing there. I was. I'm holding the knife. I looked down at Jody. Behind me, the front door opened and I turned around to see Alan. "Call the police," I cried. "Please, call the police." Looking back down, it's not Jody on the floor. It's my mother. I blink and it's my father. And then it's me. I'm lying in a pool of blood looking up at my sister standing over me with a knife. And then at my brother. The knife changes and I do too. Brother, mother, father, me, a kitchen knife, a bread knife, steak knife, a cut across my throat, a cut across theirs. In one breath, we're wrestling over the living room couch, and in the next, she's standing in the street, screaming for help, trying to hold her insides in place. I'm stabbed in the gut, crying out for help. I'm standing at the door calling the police. I'm holding the knife, not knowing what to say. Call the police, please call the police. Sometimes there's another person there. Sometimes it's someone that I know, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes they flee out the back just before the front door opens. Sometimes it's my knife, sometimes it's theirs, but there is always a knife. I'm standing over her, plunging the knife into her stomach. That time I was angry, another time I'm sad. Sometimes as I die, I forgive him, or her, and sometimes I don't. But I'm always scared, always dying. 100 voices speak out to me at once, on the floor, from the kitchen, from the door. It's a loop, they say. It's all coming true. For a moment, I can feel grass on my face. I see Kibble in the distance, smacking the side of an old screen, trying to get something to reset. He's screaming, but the noise just echoes back into another dying victim. I'm holding my stomach. There's blood. I'm holding my breath. No, I can't breathe. I'm laughing. I'm crying. Then we're sitting on the couch, just Jody and me. In that one instance where everything went as planned and we shared a box of takeout food. Just a long workday coming to an end. Where she opened the door and that was that. No left turns, straight roads ahead. The canvas texture of her cheap living room couch brushes against my fingertips. The condensation from my drink leaves a spot on her table. I forget to use a coaster. And then something burns in me, something blue and then black. A square, every symbol at once. Error, error, error. The TV catches fire, the takeout box is razor blades. We strangle, burn, cut, scream. On the floor, in the hallway, in 100 places, in 100 ways. I'm killing, being killed, and watching it at the same time as figures blend from one to the other, as a perfect amalgamation of possibilities emerge into blending, bleeding figure. The average of outcomes of all we could have been and done. Killer, witness, victim. I'm killing me as I watch. It looks like me and her and him and the others. There is so much blood. Please, call the police. Something slaps me. It takes a couple of seconds for my eyes to uncross. There are so many faces, but they end up looking like Kibble. He is sweating like a pig standing above me. I'm in the grass and he's shaking and eating a Hershey bar. The world slowly grows solid. Apparently all it took for the system to reset was recalibration. A Hershey bar. Kibble sat down next to me, wiping his forehead. "Holy shit," he wheezed. "Holy shit, it worked." "What did you—" Before I finished my sentence, something stung me. I touched my stomach with my hand and drew back a little blood. I had a cut on my stomach, nothing big. "You didn't ask it right," Kibble said. "I told you, you have to do it right." "I gotta know," I whispered. "I gotta know who did it." It took some convincing, but I made Kibble ask a final query. This one didn't turn out all that bad. "If I testify against my brother, will my sister's killer face justice?" I got a straight answer. 94%. It's almost a certainty. But can you accept those odds when it comes to murder? I'm not sharing what it said. That's for me and my brother to know. Just know that it was certain. Kinda. My father had a seizure on that night and almost ran himself and Mom off the road. My brother got taken to the infirmary after some kind of psychotic break. And when I had my moment in court, I lied to the jury. I said that I saw some things that I didn't. In the end, that's what got him convicted. I had to do it. The scar on my stomach healed, but it still hurts when I think about it. Not a physical pain, not an imagined one either. Not a pain at all, really. It's more like a memory of something. Sometimes I can look down and imagine a knife plunging into my gut. Sometimes I'm the one holding the knife. It's like there's a part of me that's still processing the result. Looping. As far as I know, Kibble is still working on No Future. I think he got the house by now. He's not answering my calls, and I think that's for the best. Whatever he's working with isn't natural, or maybe it's more natural than I'm comfortable with. I think I've heard somewhere that perceiving something can change the outcome. Maybe there's something to that. Not only when looking at the future, but at things that were. I've done what I had to do and said what I needed to say. I know for sure what really happened. If the outcome has changed since, that's not my fault. I'm not a killer, not a victim, and 94% is not a certainty. I don't care if the ache never goes away. I know my future. I swear, of all the times that I could have gone back to, this couldn't have possibly been any worse. Everything is foobar. Those jerks in the lab couldn't even send me back enough to have a decent time before things going straight to hell. I wonder if I can find them and give them a piece of my mind right now. No, that would just be a waste of time. Right now, I need to find him. God knows what could happen when I don't come back immediately. They'll probably send somebody back here after me. No way that I'm going back there though, not if I can help it. Forgive any kind of typos or anything that I might have here. I'm not really used to this era of technology, and text-to-speech is a pain in the butt in any decade that you land in. Hell, even 20 years from now it's no better. Not that the technology gets much better thanks to everything going to crap. I wish I could enjoy the first taste of freedom that I've had in years. I've been locked up, not of my own volition, mind you. I was just a kid when things started going bad. I grew up only knowing chaos and isolation. If we're being totally honest, I don't know a whole lot about how things went down in the early days. But maybe what I do remember can help avoid what's going to happen, assuming that anyone takes me seriously. I don't know what year they sent me back from. I lost all track of time, to be honest. I do know that it's currently New Year's Eve 2024 when I'm typing this. That means that you have about 2 months before they start popping up. They'll come slow at first. You'll hear about strange isolated events, horror movie scenarios in a lot of cases. Pretty high death counts that will make no sense to anybody based in reality. That's the problem though. It's that we've only seen our reality. These assholes that sent me back here, the collective, they're supposed to be keeping the lid on these things. The veil tears and they show up to stitch it back up. Things slip through when it tears though, and it's those things that start to grow out of control around March. First, it was isolated, various areas of the world. There were reports of a cruise ship coming back with everybody on board slaughtered, torn apart and chewed on by something that was never found. Over in Italy, a small countryside town went up in flames overnight. Talks of the dead rising up to attack the living. By the middle of 2025, there is a new terror popping up every week or so in the United States. Rhode Island was one of the first states to fall under martial law. Borders got closed down by the government. The military was sent in to make sure that nobody goes in or out. I ended up in a holding cell with a survivor who was there when things began, and it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. One day in mid-June, he said that a visible tear opened up in the sky, like a theater curtain ripping right down the middle. This giant thing climbed right out. According to him, it looked human enough, though it looked pretty rough, like the flesh was rotting right off the bone. Eyes were sunken in, hollow pits that just surveyed the land around it, looking for something unknown. Well, not long after that, everybody found out what it was after. Food. This thing landed right down in the middle of Providence, tall as a 3-story building, and started picking up anyone stupid enough to be nearby. It was reaching through windows, grabbing people out and just devouring them. He said that it reminded him of this cartoon from before the terrors, giants that would just eat humans endlessly without their hunger ever being satisfied. The bad thing was, this monster had no way of dying. The military did a flyby within a couple of hours of it appearing. They lit the thing up with enough bombs to take down a small nation, and this thing just started walking off, covered in flame but totally unbothered. Providence was in ashes by the end of the day, and that thing is still off wandering the countryside somewhere. Hell, it's probably crossed state lines by this point, considering the military fell for good in 2026. I can't give a good rundown of everything that happened across the country since I was still a kid at the time. I think I was 10 when my little town finally got a tear in the sky, far above us. God, I can't forget that day no matter how hard I try to. The year was 2027. The United States had fallen and divided itself into various city-states and no-go zones based on the tears that had been appearing. To our east was the Georgia coastline, turned red by a tear that opened to somewhere underwater off Tybee Island. All the sea life died within days, the smell of rotting fish reaching inland for weeks on end. By the time that it faded away, we had become used to it. Meanwhile, off to the northwest, there was a tear that had covered the entire area from Macon onward in a thick darkness. If you were close enough, you could see where it starts. Just a thick veil of darkness engulfing everything, all the way up to Atlanta with no idea how far on it stretched. I saw some survivors from there getting carted through a collective facility a couple years back. Just empty shells of people. One of them was raving about these centipede creatures and a king of nightmares, but there was never any confirmation that we could get from them through all their madness. It was such a clear day when the tear had happened. The way the sun was shining, you would think that nothing bad could have happened that day. Scary stuff only happens in the dark. That was what I was raised to believe, at least. We were in one of the designated stable areas that the collective watched over. According to them, our area had a steady grip on reality that kept the tears from appearing. Maybe it wasn't much compared to what we all had before, but the little commune that was set up to survive was everything that I ever needed. We had friends and neighbors, all of us doing what we could to help each other survive in the terror that we were living through. My dad grew crops, our neighbor Dale was a doctor, Mom taught a little preschool for all the kids, making sure that they knew how to read and write. Even in the midst of an unfolding hell, we were making it. We were surviving. I was out helping Dad and some of the other neighbors in the garden. We were trying to pick what we could before these suns scorched the crops, leaving them useless to eat. The meager supply of tomatoes, peppers, and sweet onions wouldn't be much, but the little potato patch that we had was booming so far that year, promising some nice consistency in our diets. I know all of us kids were drooling watching the small patch that we had thrown watermelon seeds down, seeing them bloom into fruits larger than our heads. Ricky was one of the other kids around my age. He almost got all of us in trouble by convincing us that one was ready and that we should take it off the vine. Idiot wouldn't listen to any of us that told him it wasn't ripe yet, cracking it open himself and seeing almost all white and pale green inside instead of the juicy red. We only didn't get in trouble because of how fast everything went downhill in the next hour or so. We all looked up when the shadow passed over the field, blocking out the sun that we had just been desperately sweating under. There hadn't been a cloud in the sky, nothing to give us even the slight shade from the heat. Yet everything started to look like nighttime within seconds, right during the middle of the day. Everyone looked to the sky, met with the same terrifying sight. A tear was opening above us, right in front of the sun high above, blocking it from view. Wherever it was high enough to cast a shadow over the land as far as the eye could see, and the wildlife of crickets and frogs that had been screaming just moments before finally started to go quiet. There was no sound, just the whisper of a slight breeze, chilling me to the bone in the formerly sun-soaked June heat. Through the tear I could see. I'm going to sound insane here, but I swear there was an audience. There were thousands of them, maybe millions, all watching through like the tear ripping our sky in half was a movie screen. And then the threads began to fall. Millions of them. Razor-thin threads that could barely be seen in the darkness that now engulfed us. The audience threw the tear applaud, rising in fervor as these threads descended on us, falling with the force of a plane barreling toward the ground. Ricky was the first one to be hit. The thread managed to fall right onto his head, hitting him with so much force that it cracked open worse than the watermelon still sitting beside him. The way that all the blood spattered on it, you'd almost think that it had ripened up in seconds. The other kids all ran screaming, but I could just fall on the ground, staring in terror at what was happening. All around me, more people were getting hit by the strings, impaled with enough force to punch holes through them. Robin! My name was the last thing that I heard my dad say. He was looking around for me desperately, trying to get me into safety. Meanwhile, strings were hitting the small houses and shelters set up a little ways off, bursting right through the rooftop and doing untold damage to our meager life. I could hear screams coming up from that direction too, no doubt by those that were on the receiving end of the threads. I turned over, desperately trying to crawl on my belly toward anything that I thought might give me shelter, and I saw Dad running toward me, still screaming, "Robin, run!" His runs weren't natural though. They were jerky movements that almost made it look like he was floating above the ground, never quite touching down. If it wasn't for the blood soaking them, I probably wouldn't have noticed the threads that were holding him up, making him move around like some messed up marionette. He was still alive, though there was something causing a bloom of blood on his chest that was making him struggle to breathe. I watched as he was yanked around, those same exaggerated movements pulling him toward me from above. Someone, one of the other neighbors who was still alive, ran by him desperate to get to safety somewhere. Dad, totally against his will and screaming in agony, was flung right at him, threads breaking his arm to force him to grab onto the man. As soon as he did, some of the loose threads pierced right through the neighbor, picking him up to be a hellish puppet. The entire time, the audience above is roaring with laughter and delight. applause ringing out like thunder as they saw the carnage unfold. Maybe they thought that I was dead. Maybe they were just saving me for later, but the puppets paid no mind to me. At this point, there were probably 5 or 6 of them hanging around the garden area that we had set up, some being made to walk around in an exaggerated swagger, others forced into doing a stupid dance, and 2 that had gone off into their little corner, whoever was puppeteering for them making them slap each other comically like an old cartoon bit. I was just laying there, tears pouring down my cheeks as I prayed they couldn't find me, watching the audience above get plenty of laughs from the show unfolding all around me. Before long, the meat puppets started to wander off, searching out any that were still hiding in homes nearby. Nobody was safe, it seemed. Women, children. I saw in the distance one of the small kids, probably 3 years old, being made to walk around, hanging just above the ground as the threads manipulated his small limbs. I can still hear his cries when it gets too quiet, too guttural, begging for his mother to help him. But she was strung up right alongside the poor kid, unable to do anything. Eventually, I came to my senses, feeling hunger well up in my stomach that made it growl loud. It had been hours, maybe a whole day, I honestly don't know. The sun was still invisible behind the giant audience above, still stuck to their seats, watching as unseen masters pulled the strings on my former friends around me. At one point, I ended up eating a raw sweet onion straight out of the ground, wincing a little as dirt nestled in my teeth, but my stomach was grateful nevertheless. Looking back, there's no way that a 10-year-old kid should have gotten out of that alive, much less been the only survivor, but I made it. I crawled my way over to one of the tool sheds that was unlocked, still awaiting the gardening equipment that we had taken out what felt like just minutes ago, back before our lives were destroyed. The sounds of sobs was inescapable, with all those strung up still somehow alive despite their grievous injuries. The audience was still watching intently, and nowhere else to be, I guess. Through the tear, I could see that their eyes were totally black, teeth visible in wide grins that never seemed to leave. Occasionally, the puppets would dance or do something that brought a little cheer, keeping the audience hooked. Finally, agonizingly, I got into the tool shed and picked up a rusty hatchet that was in there. I was running off pure survival instinct now, thinking that I could cut down any strings that got in my way, while I army crawled myself out of town. There wasn't any logic behind it, just the need to escape. For the sake of keeping my own body intact, I stuck to the ditches and wooded areas where I could. There were still strings hanging down everywhere, nearly invisible to the naked eye, but the trees helped to block them and ensure that I had a little more mobility. I clutched that hatchet so tight that I thought there would be a small handprint on it by the time that I got to the outskirts of town, just hoping that there would be some way out of here. Of course, it wasn't going to be easy. The audience above wasn't done using me for entertainment, apparently. I emerged from a wooded area after pulling myself through a small creek, desperately hoping that I was finally at the end of my journey, only for my mother and father to suddenly fall from the sky above, seemingly flung over on their threads to meet me as I clawed for freedom. All I remember is their blank expressions, staring at me without recognizing. Their minds had been broken from the pain, limbs twisted and broken from forced movement, and the audience above wanted them to be the ones to capture me. All I remember is swinging the hatchet in desperation as they were flung at me, managing to catch a few of the threads holding them up. Both fell to the ground, mangled as more threads began to fall towards us to try and pick them back up. Before they could get their hands on my parents again, I used the dull hatchet to deliver multiple hits to their necks, putting them out of their pain. And then I kept moving, this time running on 2 legs as the threads chased me down. Someone found me passed out near Highway 40, still gripping that hatchet face down in a ditch. Next thing I know, I was loaded up in a truck and driven to a nearby collective facility, put into a small holding room where two suited agents asked me millions of questions about what had happened. That was years ago now. I've been back and forth forever, at first in a collective-run foster home for survivors of tears. If you thought that the foster system in the good times was bad, let me tell you that this was a whole other issue. Plenty of assholes left to reap abuse on those of us with no other alternative. That's how I eventually ended up in a collective prison colony, after beating a foster father to death. Not that I was the only one who took part in killing him. The others still had a possibility at living though, so I took the fall. Through the prison system, I've met plenty of others with stories equally gruesome. We all ended up in here one way or another, just trying to survive most of the time. But the collective is merciless in collecting prisoners to keep their own small efforts to maintain a society moving. And then about 3 weeks ago, I got taken by one of the guards to a special program. They found a tear that was different from the others, one that, with the right measure of electricity channeled through it, apparently let them send people back to unspecified times. They told us that if we go back through the tear, we would be granted our freedom but had to find collective agents in the time that we went back to and warn them of what's to come. Most of us practically jumped at the chance because, hell, we had never seen what a normal world looked like. I don't know what time period the others ended up in, but scouring the internet in the days since I've been back hasn't afforded any kind of information about if they made it or even how to find the collective. Before everything went to hell, they were a shadow organization. The least they could have done in the future was give us some kind of distress call or something to find them. It doesn't matter. I'm pulling up now. I can see her through the window smiling as she talks. He's in there too, reading a newspaper, unaware that the happy little life he's cultivated is about to come crashing down around them. They don't know that hell is coming to Earth. I'm going to make sure that they never do. Do you know how easy it is to buy a gun in 2024? I was able to walk right into a pawn shop and pick one up with the old money they gave me before sending me through. Not even $100, and I was the owner of a fancy little revolver. I didn't need to go all out or anything. Just one box of ammo, enough to load the revolver with. I wouldn't even need every bullet that was in the cylinder. Just one for Mom and one for Dad, and 2 for me. Look, if anybody from the collective ends up reading this, I've done my job. I warned you, you should know what's going to happen from here. If you're able to stop it, it is a whole different situation, but that's not my problem anymore. Whether the tears happen in this timeline or not, I'm going to make sure that I never have to deal with it. Considering the time, you might be better off following suit instead of ringing in the new year. If you're reading this, do yourself a favor. Die now. Ring in the new year with a bottle of pills or a shotgun blast. It's gonna be the best thing that you could ever commit to. Yeah, I know. Asking everybody to do that to themselves is pretty harsh. I don't say that lightly in any way though, I promise. It's for good reason. Because if you don't do it now, you may never have the chance later. I went into bioengineering for the sole purpose of helping to better the world. If there was some way that we could create sustainable agriculture in any weather, more bountiful crops, or hell, even a substitute for meat farming, I would be happy with my accomplishments. Unfortunately, I was young and naive when I thought all that, before I was hired for the job that probably damned us all. It was honestly too good to pass up thanks to all the loans that I had from grad school. Military contractors in the biomedicine field said that when they hired me on that they would cover my full tuition loan paid back after 1 year on the job. If you paid for graduate school, you know that that's one hell of a deal. especially if the company is also paying a six-figure salary on the higher end, with major clearance requirements. I'm not a dumbass. I know it was either that or back behind the goddamn gas station counter scanning cat food and condoms for idiots that shouldn't be reproducing. Oh, Jesus Christ. Every realization that I have just makes everything worse. So, government contractor, right? We worked in a surprisingly normal spot in the American Midwest. A pretty big skyscraper that housed the rest of the firm's businesses. Ours was deep underground though, highly secure thanks to the nature of our work. Now I won't lie, when I stepped in I was super worried that I had signed up to work for the Umbrella Corporation or something. Honestly, it would probably be better to have a zombie apocalypse than this unending nightmare that we're about to experience. Short rundown. I was an associate researcher on this project, as well as the lead on lab tests. They were looking for the miracle drug, something that had a 100% cure rate for anything from cancer to dementia to the common cold. I was absolutely behind the goal of the project from the start. Meanwhile, our head scientist, an older woman named Deb, was incredibly stony about everything. Nothing seemed good enough for her. There was no excitement when we hit breakthroughs, just a constant, we need more progress type of attitude. We couldn't please her even with cutting-edge science. Meanwhile, Sam was another associate, her specialty being in genetic engineering. Colton rounded out the team, presiding over specimens, records, and administering samples. It was a small team to try and minimize leaks, because we were going to change the world. It's been 5 years since then, and we've gone through a hell of a lot of attempts. Splicing together DNA to try to create a cure-all isn't easy, and I'm not about to get into the specifics of it because it's not important right now. As with any drug trials, we had to start testing on animals. Look, my ethics weren't for it either, but we started with the standard lab rats before moving on to primates. The lab rats had shown good promise finally, with most diseases infected cured within a few weeks with a round of the drugs. Even the cancer had started going away, cells repairing themselves from the decay. Primate trials went much the same, with the apes even having a more energizing effect that made them recover even faster. It was all going so right for everything that we were working towards. We should have seen the signs once we had started human trials. We didn't take volunteers, but instead, we were given executed death row prisoners, some that we were kind of lucky about, thanks to either the time it takes the American justice system to do a damn thing, or just due to their own genetic predispositions. Some subjects already had sicknesses to test on. Cancer, one with Alzheimer's, and even a poor soul with unchecked syphilis that was running wild. We had our work cut out for us. It was like a miracle when we had started the treatments, giving them a 14-day course of injections meant to heal them on a genetic level. It was administered straight to the spinal column, spreading through the nervous system. What we saw as the results were amazing. The cancer patient was better by the 5th day, the tumor shrinking down to non-existence in his brain. Unfortunately, when it finally shrunk, he seemed to have an utter breakdown of what he had done, murdering his family and neighbors to land on death row. I felt bad for him in a way, because the guy was just screaming pure rage and grief over the death of his kids and wife. Well, that's when he tried killing himself in his cell, running his head into the wall constantly. Guards were able to intervene, getting to him before he could do any lasting harm to himself. Recovery for him was normal, though he did have a slight concussion. The treatment continued, with the concussion fading in a few days. The subject was kept on a full psych lockdown for the remainder of the test, which he received psychological counseling. Eventually, though, they took his request with a very reluctant and honestly uncaring attitude, and it was approved. He would continue helping us with the test until the trial was completed, and then he would be allowed to choose execution if he wanted. The guy was distraught, obviously haunted by what he had done. Other test subjects were proceeding a lot the same, though one began to completely break down after a short time. According to him, we were injecting him with baby's blood, unlocking his satanic powers. I didn't feel bad for him considering that he was executed for the massive amount of things found on hard drives in his house. While administering tests and treatments, we worked in pairs. If there was a subject in the room, there was always one of us paired with one of the 2 guards who worked down here with us. It was me on duty for treatments that day, and the subject was being relatively quiet for the most part. We went in with no issue. The subject was cuffed by the guard and I set up to administer the drug. Before I knew what was going on, he started ranting again, saying that he was going to take down the government and help Christ reign. The typical stuff that you see these days. Except this time he didn't keep to ranting, instead leaning over and sinking his teeth into my arm. He wouldn't let go either, no matter how much the guard tried pulling his jaw open or I knocked him in the head. Eventually, he started drawing blood through my scrubs and coat, so the guard took his last resort. Drawing his pistol, he leveled it at the subject's forehead, moving me aside and pulling the trigger. I felt his grip on my arm loosen almost instantly as the gunshot rang through, splattering gray matter on the wall behind us. The others came running within moments, seeing the steady pooling of blood on the floor. The subject was terminated, a complete waste of a trial. Can't say that he didn't deserve it, but he could have followed through on the one good thing he did in his life and finished the testing. Imagine our surprise when we went to pick him up and take him to the incinerator and he still had a pulse. Even with all the blood and guts scattered in the room, he was still breathing. That changed everything, because we realized that we might be able to finish the trial after all. We threw him on a stretcher and brought him back to the lab, using whatever we had to staunch the bleeding and set up a vitals monitor. Looking back, it's obvious why he survived, but we still didn't know at the time. He stayed alive, though in a vegetative state. X-rays showed that most of his brain was scrambled by the bullet, with the guy only able to drool and moan if he really put his remaining mind to it. Meanwhile, the syphilis that had been running rampant in him was gone, complete recovery other than what was included in his lost brain matter. And then came the final sign thanks to one of the primate subjects. We were still watching them for long-term effects, making sure that it wouldn't trigger a Planet of the Apes scenario or anything. One day, the 2 got into a fight over food, though it happened overnight so none of us saw it until the next day on camera footage. Instead, what met us when we had entered the lab was the ape enclosure soaked in blood. One of the subjects lying in the dirt, totally disemboweled, yet still trying to crawl toward the glass. It shocked us. This thing had guts hanging from where its stomach was, just dropping out like a piñata. We took him to the lab and did what amounted to a full workup to see what the hell was going on. Half of its organs were eaten by the other ape in an act of dominance. Even still, this thing continued to live, still exhibiting brainwaves and a pulse. It was fully aware of what was happening around it, though the pain caused it to scream when we weren't pumping it with morphine. We realized after a few days that something bad was happening. The ape still wasn't dead, but the wounds that it had were just scabbing over, still brutally deadly but only causing immense pain instead of expiration. After taking samples, we realized the DNA of the creature was structured differently than before. The treatment seemed to have turned off the ability to die. Of course, once we saw this in the ape subjects, we confirmed it on the human subjects as well. The gunshot wound subject was still going, with a pulse and limited brain waves active. He's sentient and able to understand basic commands, as well as make sounds with great effort. We decided to give him a test under the guise of mercy. He was given a rudimentary order: blink twice if you want to die, once for no. As soon as he blinked twice, Deb injected him with a nerve agent that would cause total death within 5 minutes. After about 2 minutes, he began to seize, body erratically jerking around the bed that he was on. His mouth began foaming, loud moans of despair coming out as his eyes rolled back in his head. His pulse dropped but never flatlined, his brain activity still going the entire way through. Even after his second dose of the nerve agent, he only suffered immense pain, but was unable to die in a conventional form. I took it upon myself to be honest with the other subject, the one who we promised an execution for his sins in service. He was distraught, of course, but went quiet after a few moments. We left him be, or at least attempted to, but before the guard in the room could react, the subject stole the gun straight from his holster. Holding the gun to his temple, the subject flipped the safety off and pulled the trigger, splattering more red on his freshly painted wall. A look of horror filled his eyes before he started screaming, the pain of what he had done settling in. The gun never left his temple and he pulled the trigger 3 more times before falling to the ground. He just lay there twitching, blood pouring from every hole in his face as his brain swirled inside with the lead. We set him up in a lab, pulse still faintly going and brainwaves still giving off from what was left of his skull. In the process of checking him out, we went ahead and did scans on the other subject. Another shock ran through all of us. His brain was reforming, matter forming and splitting off from his other cells like a reverse cancer. Things became bleak after a few days with the realization that it would only restore the parts involving life functions. They would have a pulse, consciousness, full awareness of everything at every second, confirmed by asking the subject questions and receiving rudimentary answers, but they could not die. It became too much. We almost felt like we owed it to these people to kill them after trying so hard to make a cure. There was one option that we had left though, and it was worth a shot. The incinerator. I can still smell his flesh and hear his screams. We put the conspiracy subject in first, thinking that it would probably be a little bit easier on us considering his past. When we set it off, the screams started immediately. The sounds of his limbs thrashing his nerves were burned off at the ends. We were waiting for the screaming to stop, waiting for him to finally just die. The screaming kept going though. None of us knew what to do. At some point, he must have finally lost consciousness or just became numb to the pain, but it took hours. When he finally stopped, we gave it a few minutes before shutting the flames off, pulling the cremation tray out with our fingers crossed that it had worked. His charred, blackened body was lying on the tray, twitching every so often. He let out a rasping breath, crispy vocal cords sounding like sandpaper. His pulse still beating, brain activity was still at full capacity, and even with his brain almost melting to the point of soup in it, he was still conscious. I think we found a way to actually bond the human soul to a genetic code, leaving us trapped in these meat bags through the treatment. We tried other ways, even decapitation as a full-on last resort. A severed, burned head was still giving off brainwaves, even after all of that. Any amount of pain could happen to the body, any amount of restriction and injury inflicted, but the soul of the person would stay, brain activity never ceasing. They were trapped in their own head, quite literally, even if the rest of them were destroyed. I couldn't deal with what we had wrought. The realization that saving lives had gone into unethical territory like this, with us damning a human to eternal life. Our only hope to die now was old age. And it didn't look like that was going to happen at this rate either. I finally broke down last week in the lab, seeing the near vegetated body of the cancer patient and the still severed, gawking head of the other. A scalpel was on the table next to me, and I decided that it was enough. When I went home that night, I made up my mind. I knew my anatomy, but I went into the bathroom to use the mirror just to make sure that I was accurate. The scalpel stung as it first cut, making my hand recoil, but I had to follow through. I swiped it across quickly, cutting my vein and pouring red into the sink. I didn't realize how much I had in me until I saw it on the counter, almost overflowing the sink before the drain could take it all. I choked, unable to breathe as my throat was more concerned with the vein that was open. My breath caught. Bleeding everywhere, the last thing that I remembered was falling back into unconsciousness, though it wasn't a complete blackout. I kept having waking nightmares, on the floor in a sea of my own red, unable to move as I lay face down, an iron taste on my tongue. By the time that I was able to get up, the cut had closed up, healing like a normal wound would. It was 3 days from when I tried, and all I got was waking up in a pool of my own coagulating blood. I don't think it's airborne, not yet at least. The bite that I got from one of the subjects is the only thing giving me that hope. It's something that I need to tell the others though, because if there's any possibility, it can become contagious and go widespread. And then we've doomed all of humanity to a long-suffering existence that has no escape. When I called into the lab, something was already amiss. Sam answered me, her voice frantic. Before I could tell her about the terror that I had been through, or even hope to get reassurance that I was jumping too far ahead, she breathlessly told me of the situation going on there. It's New Year's Eve, 2024, and Deb was going home from the lab last night, late after apparently putting in a long night. On her drive home, she was hit head-on by a drunk driver, already reveling before the year was due to turn. According to the coroner, she was decapitated almost immediately, the other car hitting her at over 100 miles per hour, enough to tear her body to shreds in the impact. "Sam, please tell me that she's dead," I asked, begging whatever God above to forgive me for what I had done. Her breath caught on the other end of the line, sobs beginning softly but growing louder as she struggled to find the words. "No," was all that she could get out before I hung up. Scars still visible on my neck, I made my way to work earlier today, hoping that it was all just a bad dream. Sam or Colton must have managed to get the coroner or first responders before they could see any more of what was happening, because Deb's head was situated in the middle of one of the labs, sitting upright on the table, sliced diagonal so that the lower right half of it was missing. Her left eye was looking at me through the glass, pleading with me to do something as what remained of her mouth made empty words begging for death. Sam and I simply stood on the other side of the observation glass, unsure of what to do. Colton eventually joined us, bringing a large bottle of whiskey so that we could try to drink our worries into oblivion. As much as we had tried though, there wasn't any way to get rid of all this. "Maybe she got bit like you did," Colton offered up. I simply shook my head. Deb never did the hands-on stuff. She wouldn't have gotten close enough for any kind of contact. I just shrugged. I think she's going to, heal from this eventually. I would hope. Not sure how the hell it would happen though. I mean, think about it, her body was splattered across the front of an F-150. If she does heal and regrow a body, it's going to be long and painful. Sam chimed in now. I think we all know there's only one way to figure out our question though, and it's not helping to put it off like this. She walked over to one of the counters, opening a sterilization drawer and pulling out a scalpel, keen edge shining in the moonlight. "I'll be honest, if I die it's a relief," she said before setting the blade to her wrist and getting ready to run it long ways down her arm. Before she could, another voice threw us all off. "Oh Jesus, forgive me." One of the guards was whispering, crossing himself as he locked eyes with Deb's remains on the table. We didn't even notice him come in, and none of us had briefed him on what was happening. Hell, we hadn't even briefed any of the guards, too caught up in our own terror. It looked like Deb was whispering something back to him, but before any of us could react, he pulled the gun from his side, setting it to his temple and pulling the trigger. Sam dropped the scalpel, all of us running to his body as we all tried to confirm if he was dead or help him if not. I don't know about them, but everything inside me was praying that he was gone. I kneeled on the floor next to his body, reaching a hand to his wrist as one blown-out eye met mine. Red was pooling under his head now, spilling from his nose as the brain in his head settled into a new shape. His pulse was still going strong. He kept breathing, ragged as his body reeled from the shock. We took him into one of the bedrooms, setting him up in a bed and dosing some morphine for the pain that he was no doubt in now. All he could do was scream, loud sobs racking his entire body and making blood spurt from his nose. It sounded like he was begging for forgiveness, begging to die, but was unintelligible thanks to the brain damage that he was currently suffering. Sam decided that there was no way around it. If she died, she was free of the hell that we were all quickly coming to terms with. If not, she had the rest of eternity to deal with it. She grabbed the scalpel again, stabbing it down into her wrist and dragging it jagged up her arm, screaming the entire time. Red gushed from the wound, but Sam only lost consciousness after a while. Colton and I stitched her up right there in the lab, setting her on a couch in the break room so that she could rest. I'm not sure where he disappeared to after that. Maybe he went up above and is thinking about walking into traffic. Maybe he just needed to call someone. I sat in the lab for a few minutes looking at Deb's remains and hearing the guard's screams from down the hall. The subjects were quiet for the most part, though I imagine if they could hear everything out here, they would probably start to gloat. They would be right too. We did this to ourselves, and we deserve every ounce of cosmic karma that our new long lives will have in store for us. I have to wonder, will I still die of old age eventually? I hope that I will. I've always been scared of growing old, to be honest, afraid to see my mind go from the Alzheimer's that I saw take my father, just like he had lost his father before him. Will it destroy me just like it did to them, with no relief of death to look forward to at the end of all the madness? If there's any solace I have, it's that there may still be a way out through time. I've spent the last 2 hours drinking myself to a point where I probably have severe alcohol poisoning, praying that I can tell the world about my sins and somehow earn some mercy in the process. I'll have plenty of time to face justice if people want to come for it, but I wrote this to try and help anyone that still has a chance. Oh, and I initiated lockdown protocols on the lab. It's probably too late, of course. Hopefully Colton is still on the premises somewhere, and I feel bad for not giving them any heads up, but maybe, just maybe, we can slow this down a little, so maybe all of you still have a chance. I really hope that you can do what I can't. It's only a matter of time until this is everywhere, considering that we've been free to go in and out of the lab as we please. A lockdown at this point is like putting a band-aid on Deb's face and hoping that it works. No, there's only slowing it down so that you might have more time. Find a way to die now, before you lose your chance forever.